Evening, Chris. What do you mean insane?
I don't even know what happened today. I keep imagining, I just keep seeing this sort of cinematic scene of the president's body man. Like, what was it, like a bouncer thing? Like the scruff of the neck kind of thing? Like, yeah, how does that happen?
Not allowed to get the jacket. Yeah, and last night when this reportedly happened, it was not a warm night in Washington either. And so,
you're out, kid.
Yeah, this is, I have a feeling that eventually we will look back on this day and we will have more clarity about what happened. But right now,
I agree.
It feels like a complete spaghetti dinner and all related courses thrown up against the wall for us to try to figure it out.
Well, enjoy.
Thanks. With this Pennsylvania coverage for the rest of the night tonight, it's now time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence. This is going to be fun to watch.
Good evening, Rachel. And I just had to put on my election night glasses because I realized when I saw you reading those numbers at the bottom of the screen that I'm going to be doing a lot of that and trying to figure out exactly what that margin is between these two. This looks like a count every vote situation. Yeah, and I mean, we'll see as it comes in. When we had been planning for just our production planning for tonight, we thought, we'll probably have 10, 12, 15% of the vote in by the end of the 9 o'clock hour. You know, Lawrence will be really doing the heavy lifting. Probably Brian will really be doing the heavy lifting. We're down to 95% of the vote in already. And this is just a very, very tight margin. Obviously, Conor Lamb was out by a big margin with the early vote coming in, but now it's very, very tight. Well, we'll see if they have to get to those absentee ballots. And this is going to be really, really a squeaker all the way. I'm glad you got your glasses. Yeah, I'm going to need it. Thank you, Rachel. Thanks, Lawrence. Well, as you can see, we are watching this special election in Pennsylvania tonight where Democrat Conor Lamb and Republican Rick Saccone are facing off. The race is still obviously too close to call. 95% of the vote in and still too close. Democrat Conor Lamb has 50% of the vote. Republican Rick Saccone has 49% of the vote at this minute. It's going to change in another minute. Conor Lamb leads by just over, at this moment, 1,000 votes, but that's been changing by the second. Steve Kornacki's been watching the returns, covering this. He's been covering the race for weeks. He's been waiting for this night. He's been waiting for this minute. Steve, what's going to happen?
Well, the number right now, Lawrence, 1,132 votes. That's the difference right now, separating Conor Lamb, who's leading with almost all these votes, and Rick Saccone, who's trying to catch him. Let me show you the lay of the land as we look for these final precincts. First of all, this big chunk of real estate here, take it off the board. Greene County, it's actually tiny in terms of the number of voters there. 100% in, so take that one off the board. Westmoreland, this is a Republican bastion. It came in late, but then it came in fast. So why Saccone? If you were watching these returns all night and you saw that lopsided Lamb lead in the early returns, that was deceptive because Westmoreland always comes in late. It came in late, fast, and for Saccone, almost all of that, it seems, is in right now. So really the action, as we're looking at this gap of 1,132 votes, the lead for Lamb right now, it's right here in this part of the district, Allegheny and Washington. And you see from the color coding the difference between these two counties. Allegheny County, you are talking about the Pittsburgh suburbs. We have talked in the age of Trump about those college-educated voters, a little more economically upscale, white-collar professionals, more moderate maybe culturally, maybe turned off a bit by Trump style. This is the part of the district where Lamb needed to run up the score tonight. We said early on the question is how much? Obviously, he's right at the cusp of what he needs to do there. There are some precincts left in Allegheny, probably going to be for Conor Lamb. That's probably going to boost him, though the question becomes this part, the red part, the other big outstanding county, Washington County, Republican bastion. Again, we talk about that contrast culturally. The white working-class suburbanites up here in Allegheny. You get more into what you'd normally traditionally associate with this district. Older, more blue-collar, less economically upscale. That's what you start to talk about in Washington County. That's red. That's where Saccone's been doing well. There are precincts there as well. So, Lawrence, that's what we're looking for. As soon as these numbers update, we'll start to see how it shakes out. But again, the question here is, can Lamb squeeze enough votes out of Allegheny to offset what's left in Washington and probably a sliver or two, I got to look closer, a sliver or two in Westmoreland? Can Lamb hold off Saccone in that part of the district?
Steve, this district is normally so hopeless for Republicans that in the last election, the Republican, hopeless for Democrats, Republican ran unopposed. Before that, Murphy ran unopposed 2 years before that. But then the last time there was a candidate against the Republican, Tim Murphy won by 28%. 2010, Tim Murphy won this district by 35%. Donald Trump, of course, won it by 20. Mitt Romney won it by 17. We're not supposed to be here tonight, Steve, talking about a real competition in a district like this.
Right. There's two things we can say. First of all, the story of this district that brings us to tonight, to put this in some context, this is going way back. You talk about a generation or two ago. This was ancestrally a Democratic district, but it switched to becoming a Republican district before Donald Trump. This is not one of those districts we talked about in 2016 that just flipped because of Trump. It was for Trump by about 20. It was for Romney by basically the same margin in 2012. The big turn here happened at about the turn of the century. It's really become increasingly Republican since then. So this would not be just a drop-off from Trump's levels. This would be a drop-off from Republican levels in the 21st century. The other thing, as we wait for these final votes, that we can say with certainty right now, since basically all the votes, almost all the votes are in, is that this continues a trend and a pattern that we've been seeing in these special elections that goes all the way back to April of 2017 when we had the first congressional special election of the Trump presidency. In that election, a Wichita-based district in Kansas, it was Trump plus 27 in 2016. They held the special election. The Republicans won, but they won by 7. That's a swing you could see of 20 points. They went up to Montana a couple months later. Trump 21 became a 6-point margin. Went to South Carolina 5, the Rock Hill area. 19 went down to 3. Same day, Georgia. Georgia was one of the outliers here. It actually went from about 1 to 4. So that's one that Republicans point to. But again, you see the trend here. You saw it in Alabama. That was Trump by 28 points. Ended up going for the Democrats. So you see this swing. And again, here, this was Trump by 20 points. Whatever happens tonight, maybe it ends up being laying by a point. Maybe he ends up losing by a fraction of a point. But that is Democrats shaving off 20 points from that Trump margin. We saw something like that here. We saw it here. We saw it here. We saw it here. We saw it in Alabama. That starts to look like a trend.
Steve, we're going to widen up the discussion here with our panel, but please stay with us and feel free to shout in whenever there's something we need to know from these results. We're joined now by Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster, Jonathan Alter, columnist with Daily Beast, Ron Klain, former senior aide to President Obama, and Kimberly Atkins, chief Washington reporter and columnist for the Boston Herald. And Ron Klain, I want to go to you first because you've been in the room with the Democrats in the Senate and in the Congress after they've had a bad night at the polls where they have lost ground substantially or actually lost a seat. What is that discussion like tomorrow for the Republicans? Because no matter how this comes out, they've just lost a 20-point advantage in that district.
Yeah, that's right, Lawrence. I mean, look, obviously, it's better to win than it is to lose, and I hope Conor Lamb wins. But however this comes out, this is basically a tied election in an overwhelmingly Republican district. And so what Democrats will be talking about tomorrow is this. They need to win 27 House seats to take back the House. There are 112 congressional districts better for Democrats than this district currently being held by Republicans. 112 districts in Republican hands that are more favorable to the Democrats than this district.
Okay,
so if we
Ron,
can
I just want to stop there and double underline this point for the audience. Here we have an election tonight that might be decided by 1 point or less, basically the elimination of the Republican advantage in this district in Pennsylvania, and you're saying that the Democrats look at the congressional map and they see 110 districts where it would be even easier for them to win than in this district.
That's right, based on the outcome of the 2016 election, prior congressional races. So, I mean, again, it is better to win. I hope Conor Lamb wins. All the Democrats are rooting for Conor Lamb to win. But whatever happens with the final few votes here, this has been a devastating setback for Republican efforts to hold the House in 2018, a huge momentum boost for Democratic efforts to take the House in 2018.
Cornell Belcher, as a pollster, when you look at this, what's the lesson it teaches Democrats?
Well, a couple lessons. One, Democratic enthusiasm is important, but also, look, I was a pollster for Howard Dean in 2006 when we took back the House, and I got to tell you, what we're...
Cornell, we're going to have to go to Steve Kornacki. He's got more for us. Steve, go ahead.
Well, it's going to sound like small potatoes, Lawrence, but when you're down to this...
Every potato counts tonight, Steve.
Every potato's a big potato. So I was telling you when we came on what the margin has actually gone up here ever so slightly, but maybe ever so critically for Conor Lamb, now sitting, as you can see here, at 1,238. It was about 100 less when we came on, almost exactly 100 less. I can show you what happened was we said he's going to get a little bit more in from these Pittsburgh suburbs, from Allegheny. There are still a few precincts to squeeze out of there. That's what happened. A few more came in, and Conor Lamb, he squeezes out, basically pads that margin by 100 votes, and that's critical for him because, again, the more he gets out of here, the more he can withstand what's left in that Republican part of the district.
Steve, would you call that overperforming the expectation or underperforming the expectation for Lamb in that particular spot?
It is exactly where he needed to be.
Okay.
And that's what we've been seeing all night. He's right on that cusp, and that's why it comes down to this.
All right, Steve, no potato is too small. Jump back in.
You got it.
Whenever you need to. Cornell, go ahead.
Let me pick up on that point that Steve was making. Is we typically see a 15, 16-point drop-off in Democrat precinct turnout in midterms versus Republican precinct turnout. We're not seeing that across the country in these elections. We're seeing, in fact, Democrats overperforming Republican precincts, which is part of that sort of that Trump effect we see going on. And what I was saying earlier is, even when in 2006, we did not see college-educated white women breaking away, which is why the suburbs are coming so competitive, breaking away from Republicans and what they see around Trump, the way we saw them breaking away from George Bush. It is very different. And if I was Republican, I'd be most concerned about what college white women are doing in the suburbs.
John Alter, all politics is local, but there is a trend. There's a trend for Republicans, and the Trump effect in that trend is not good.
That's right, and it's only 16 months after Trump carried that district by 20 points. That in itself actually has a little, word of warning for Democrats, because there's still a long time to go before the November election, and a lot can happen in American politics. And you see some of these Republican voters who kind of came home to Saccone after not being at all clear whether they're going to turn out.
We got to go back to Steve Kornacki, see if it's a French fry or what. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, we're trying to make French fries here. Again, this is just what we know now is we think that there are a grand total of about 9,000 uncounted votes left. Oh, we just had an update here. Let's do a little bit of quick math here. Okay, you can see here the margin now is inside of 1,000. That goes to 918. The gap now, Saccone within 918 of Lamb. I am going to check this. Let me see if I can do this on the fly right here. It actually... I got to check if this came from, we thought there might be a few precincts left here in Westmoreland, or if this was in Allegheny, but you see you got a little bit, just ever so slightly came in there, and the gap now, again, it is within 1,000, so a little bit closer to Saccone right there. As I said, we think we have 9,000, now a little bit less than 9,000 votes to be counted. There's Saccone trying to basically make up here, a 900-vote gap.
Steve, how long is it going to take them to count those 9,000 votes?
At this rate, it might be a while, but no, I mean, it really is. Westmoreland came in real fast. And let me see if I can get them up on the screen so you can see. Westmoreland came in real fast. I got to just see if it's sort of the last remaining precincts here. That's what we were looking at, and that would, if that's the case, that would limit us. We'd be down to Allegheny, Washington. Remember, Green is off the board.
And Steve, we will come back to you whenever you say. John Alter, anyone who's watching this, who's ever sat at home thinking, I'm not sure if my vote counts. Tonight's one of those nights.
We're talking about 100 votes. In November. 100 million people are going to vote in these midterm elections. So we shouldn't read too much into any of this, even though it's a good night for the Democrats, because they used to say almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Well, if Conor Lamb falls short, almost counts also in overwhelmingly Republican districts. But having said that, Democrats need to understand that one of the things that helped them here is they had a really good candidate. And if they go into some of these races with the wrong candidates, they're not going to flip these seats. So it's not enough just to have an anti-Trump tide. You've got to have the right candidates.
Kimberly Atkins, since the last congressional election, the Democrats went from not being able to find a candidate to having a candidate with 9,000 votes uncounted and almost 1,000 votes ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, special elections are very local. I always give that caveat for all of this. But there's lessons here that can go forward, looking forward and predictive of what other elections will be. And it's about the candidates, as you pointed out. It's about issues. It's about how people connect. And it's about Donald Trump. I mean, remember, Donald Trump campaigned in this district, although at that rally he talked more about himself than he did about Rick Saccone. But he was there. Is it that Donald Trump's appearance in that district helped the Democratic get out the vote effort? It's quite possibly true in that sense. You also had these candidates. I mean, the former candidate, Congressman Murphy, was able to get, he was a Republican, but he got the support from unions, which Rick Saccone isn't doing. It's showing the power of unions here. It's showing how voters in this very Rust Belt place are not lockstep with Republicans. It depends on the message that's being sent. So I think Republicans and Democrats have a lot to learn about this race and a lot to dissect from it moving forward.
Ron Klain, the Republicans watched the president go into this district on Saturday night, deliver an absolutely crazed performance. We're going to come back to that in a moment, though, because Steve Kornacki has more.
Sorry to interrupt, but I can give you a little bit more on these votes we're looking for. We can break them down a little bit, I think, what's left. We're looking at about 3,000 votes that are left in Allegheny County. Now, remember, we're saying this is where Lamb has been sort of running up the score tonight. Overall, across the county, Lamb is running at 58%. Now, we don't know if that's going to hold for each one of these remaining precincts that's out. But again, Lamb has been doing better in Allegheny than anywhere else. About 3,000 votes from Allegheny still to come. Then about 6,000 total. I said we weren't sure if those final precincts from Westmoreland were in. They are still to come. So we are looking for more precincts from Westmoreland. We expect those to be Republican, to be Saccone. Also from Washington, we're expecting of the 6,000, probably more from Washington than from Westmoreland. But what we're seeing tonight in those two counties, again, you're looking at about 53, 57% that Saccone has been running at. These are the Republican areas, but again, we don't know if those percentages are going to hold in each of these precincts, but is there enough if you're getting 53, 57, whatever percent of that 6,000 versus what Lamb is going to get out of those remaining 3,000 or so in Allegheny? And again, you do the math right there. We did it a minute ago. 918 votes. That's the margin right now. 918 votes is the lead. That looks like a 4. 918 for Conor Lamb.
And Steve, I imagine it matters how many of these unreported precincts in Washington County are right along that border with Allegheny County, because there you might start to see more sympathies for Lamb the closer you get to Allegheny County.
Yeah, no. There's definitely that. We're also hurt a little bit by the fact that Westmoreland decided tonight, I'm not sure why, they decided not to report these out by precinct. So we were all ready to go and get you a better read on that. But yeah, and the other wild card in this, too, that to keep in mind tonight is that Rick Saccone is an elected official. He is a state legislator in Pennsylvania, member of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives. A lot of that district's in Allegheny County. He's not winning, he's winning that district, not surprisingly. The key there, though, is in that part of the district, his fall off from Trump not as severe, so that might have boosted him ever so slightly. Again, we're talking microscopically here, ever so slightly in Allegheny County, which otherwise, a Lamb County.
Thanks, Steve. We will come back as you say we have to. Ron Klain, the Democrats looking at this tonight have to be thinking that they're looking at those 110 districts that you mentioned, where they've got 110 districts, as you said, where the climb up to close the gap with the Republican is not as difficult as it is in this county, in this district.
That's right. And Lawrence, as you mentioned, President Trump came in last weekend to campaign for Saccone with an absolutely wild and insane performance. So the president says he is going to go around the country and campaign in districts all over the country this fall. And I think the Democrats' view are basically saying tonight, is that a promise? Well, please, because I think there are a lot of Republican districts where the airports will be closed when Air Force One flies over. They are not going to want Donald Trump to come in and do in their district what he did in Saccone's district. Again, whether Saccone wins or loses by a hair, there's no question that Trump is dragging him down. It's a dramatic change. Look, I think John Alter's right. It is a big change in a short period of time. Things could change back. But it is a dramatic change in a very short, in the period of the Trump presidency, and that's telling you something about how voters feel about Donald Trump.
Kimberly Atkins in Massachusetts, the place where your paper is located, the Boston Herald. Ted Kennedy, I remember, used to tell Democratic senators in the South, and in the early 90s, they had Democratic senators in Georgia, in Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, and he would say to them, listen, I'll come down and help you, or I'll stay away, whichever will help you more. And people have always known that within a party, that not everyone within the party can help everyone else within the party. And there is a question in the Republican Party now about how much do you really want Donald Trump to come to your district and help with your reelection?
And that's a real big question. I think the problem for some of these Republicans who may not want the president to come is that he's vowing to come anyway. This is about him. He is making his own decision about campaigning. He likes being out on the stump, and he thinks he's being helpful for the Republican Party and bringing it to a place where he is, even in these districts where we're seeing individually that might not be the case. So it's going to be a problem for Republicans who don't want him. I can't see him being persuaded to say, hey, can you sit this one out?
And Cornell, it's not just when it's the president, it's not just about coming to the district and coming to go out on the campaign trail. It's what did you do in Washington today? Because this is when you're voting for a member of the House, you're voting for someone to go to Washington to help Donald Trump or to resist Donald Trump. And if what you're seeing in the Trump White House every day is chaos, if it's another fired Secretary of State, if it's another White House staffer being dragged out of the building because they are suspected of violating laws, as we had one yesterday, all of that affects these campaigns.
And one of the things that we're picking up in polling now is this question of whether you want a candidate who's going to go work with Donald Trump or a candidate that's going to be a check on Donald Trump. And Democrats have that advantage on check on Donald Trump, which is important. But I also say from a tactical standpoint, why this is so important, this district is so important. Republicans had spent a lot of money here, Donald. And this is a district they don't normally have to spend money in. And when you look at that playing field, one of the things about 2006, we competed in more places, and we made Republicans spread their money around. If Republicans have to compete this way and a 20-point Republican, this is not a swing district, right? There's 100 some districts more competitive than this. At some point, you literally sort of run out of money and ability to compete in all these districts.
We got to go back to Steve Kornacki. Steve.
All right, Lawrence, here's what I got. I've got the list here. I think this is current of the outstanding precincts in Washington County. Remember, a lot of vote, relatively speaking, still there. We're saying Republican area can Saccone collapse, that margin of 918 votes. Basically, I'm going to read you a series of numbers here, and what you got to keep it, I'm going to read you what Trump did in these precincts in 2016. And then you got to keep in mind that on average in this county tonight, Saccone is running 8 points lower than Trump. So that might give you an idea what to expect as these remaining precincts come in. So here we go. I got 60. So again, if form holds, that would probably come down to about 52. That's very rough, though. Don't quote me on that. I got 60, 61, 77. Keep going. Sorry, it's a long spreadsheet. 64, 64, 65, 62, 65, 65, 61, 65, 64. You see it landing in a similar place here. And 57. Those are the outstanding precincts. So again, if form holds, you're knocking 8 points off those roughly. That would be about Saccone's take. So again, if form holds, he's getting probably in about the mid-50s in what's left in Washington County, needing to basically erase 1,000 points here. And again, I'm just going to look at my spreadsheet and make sure I'm right on this. Let's see if there's anything left. Yeah, in Allegheny, I'm looking at the Trump total in what's left in Allegheny, 57, 52. And remember, Saccone is underperforming this. 57, 52, 55, 48, 61, 62, 62, 69. What I'm seeing here is some of Saccone's legislative district is left. Some areas Trump did better in Allegheny that are still left. But overall, again, Lamb, you got to keep in mind, vastly overperforming what Hillary Clinton did in 2016.
And Steve, as I look at those numbers and track them, and you look at how many votes are left to be distributed between these two candidates, what you just gave us is extremely helpful information that tells us, yes, this is too close to call, and it keeps it close to call. As I stare at those numbers when you do that subtraction that you suggested.
And we just got another, and we will check now to see where this came from, but look, here's the margin. It's come down a little bit more, 540 votes. I'm going to go check and see exactly where this leaves us with what's left. But again, what we were just saying, all those, basically all a dozen of those precincts when I started that were outstanding in Washington, you expect to go to Saccone. That's not the question. The question is, do they go to him by a big enough margin to erase that 900? It looks like he got it down to 540. I'm going to go check and see what's still left.
Okay, thanks, Steve. John Alter, this is going to be a count every vote situation, obviously. But as Steve was just pointing out, this trend, you can look at the Saccone candidacy and say, okay, how was he supposed to win? How was he supposed to do better? Like, what could he possibly have done to do better? The only thing you can think of is maybe not have Donald Trump come to town.
Well, you got to understand that Saccone is a right-to-work candidate in a district that has a lot of union membership. So that already put him at a little bit of a disadvantage in this race. Murphy, who had been the incumbent, had more labor support. And so this is just an indication of how the particulars really matter. So to take Conor Lamb's position on the issues, he's no liberal. You know, this is something that American liberals should understand, that in a lot of these districts, the best way to take it back, to flip it and hold Donald Trump accountable with a Democratic Congress, is with a more conservative candidate who's more in tune with the district. He's not for gun control, and there are a series of other issues where he agrees with Trump. So he would not have even been, if he were elected, necessarily a reliable vote for the Democrats all the time. He called for Nancy Pelosi not to be reelected Speaker if the Democrats take control. So the point is that Democrats in these other races, if they're going to flip the House, they need to think seriously not about which candidate most agrees with them, but about which candidate can win in a particular district.
And we're going to go right back to Steve Kornacki.
Okay, a few more votes coming in, and again, that little drop we saw stabilize. The margin now sitting at 585 votes. See if I get that right. Lamb up 585 votes. The other piece of news, though, is this. We are getting word there are some absentee ballots that are going to need to be counted here, and it looks like we have, in two of the counties, it's green, and this note that was handed to me, I'm not reading it. The total, though, the total number of absentee ballots from two of these counties that we're seeing is 1,400, that there are an additional 1,400 votes at least. I think there might be more from the other counties. We've got to check, but at least 1,400 votes that will then need to be counted again. If form holds from the past on these might skew a little Democratic, but again, there will be some absentee ballots here as well. Obviously, a number like 1,400 comes into play with 585 as the margin.
Steve, will they count those absentee ballots tonight?
That is what we're trying to find out right now. I expect so.
Okay. Jonathan Alter, what you were saying?
Well, I just think that you know, there's a tendency in these situations to draw too many lessons. You know, we're talking about precinct-level politics.
Right.
This is why all three of us love politics, because it does go down to the precinct level. But you just got to be careful about extrapolating too much. The politics of Pennsylvania, of Western Pennsylvania, they have their own peculiarities, and so do all of these other districts. And Democrats need to be careful not to be overconfident about retaking the House. I hear a lot of that confidence out there when I talk to Democrats, and it's really not merited yet.
We're going to go to Casey Hunt at the candidates' headquarters. Casey is at Lamb headquarters. Casey, what's the feeling there?
Well, Lawrence, so far, as you can see, it's been a real party, especially for a House race. I've been to a lot of these events. Most of the time you go to a House race victory party and it's significantly smaller. However, the mood has modulated through the night because, as you all have been talking about, and Steve Kornacki has been so tracking so intensely, this has narrowed, and at this point the crowd does not know what to expect. I think that at the end of the day, it's important to underscore what your panel was just talking about, that this is still an incredibly dramatic swing. And when we talk about what this means for the midterms in the fall, and when you hear the words Democratic enthusiasm, that's what you're looking at here in this room. I mean, these are people who are incredibly invested in a House race that, remember, this district is not going to exist in November because of gerrymandering, but and the court decision that threw out the gerrymander districts here in Pennsylvania. But this is and has laid the groundwork for Democrats to be able to run a playbook in the Trump era. And it's a combination of factors. Clearly, it's the enthusiasm, but it's also the candidates. And, you know, Conor Lamb, quite frankly, fit this district. He was very careful. I talked to him today. I asked him about the Tillerson news of today. Forgive me, the crowd boos when Rick Santorum appears on our rival cable network. It has happened several times this evening, so just by way of explanation for what is going on. But again, Conor Lamb, very careful not to criticize President Trump, instead saying he'll try to work with him. So he has tried to navigate the enthusiasm of the resistance movement, taken a lot of the money, put a lot of TV ads up on the air, very slickly done TV ads, while at the same time telling people in his district that he is going to walk that center line. He took moderate positions on guns, for example, and like I said, did not necessarily criticize the president. Meanwhile, Republicans were kind of asleep at the wheel when they selected a candidate. They're not happy with Rick Saccone. He is essentially the most conservative person they could have nominated. And again, this district, yes, it is the heart of Trump country. A corner of it is steel mills, and we saw a lot of that driving around on the roads the last day or two. But a big chunk of it is the Pittsburgh suburbs, and it looks like we're getting a little bit more cheers, perhaps some good news here at Conor Lamb headquarters. So that suburban outside of Pittsburgh, that's obviously the more populous part of this district, and I think that's really what you want to focus in on when we're trying to answer the question, okay, what does this mean? Does this mean anything when it comes to taking back the House in 2018? And as much as Republicans, and I will say there was some pretty aggressive expectation setting going into this evening, they were saying, it's going to be an early night, it's going to be Conor Lamb by 3 to 6 percentage points. When you say that going in, before the polls close, you're able to say, when it's a close race, hey, this is better than we thought it was going to be. The reality is this was a plus 20 Trump district, and they are very close to losing it tonight. And that is, I think, the fundamental reality to focus on. Lawrence.
Thank you, Casey. Now we're going to Vaughn Hilliard at Saccone headquarters. Vaughn, what's the situation there?
There were a lot of expectations coming into the night around the hype of Conor Lamb that this wasn't going to be a good night here at this headquarters. And when those first numbers were coming out with Conor Lamb with that percentage of 8%, people were back here eating and drinking, and people over the course of the night made their way up. But they just made the announcement in here that there are those precincts that are outstanding, that they don't expect those votes in tonight in those absentee ballots. But what I actually want to take you back, if I can. I was with Rick Saccone in Washington County yesterday in Cannonsburg. He was there over with Don Jr., and I was speaking with a man there. Anthony Ross was his name. He worked for 42 years at a steel facility that closed back in 2008. At that point, when it closed, he left the workforce, and he said that he was undecided at that point. I just got off the phone with him, and I said, ultimately, how did you make your decision? He told me that he voted for Conor Lamb, and he said, if this goes for Conor Lamb, the reason why Washington County will have gone for Conor Lamb is ultimately because Rick Saccone failed to take a true position on where he was with not only the unions at large, but particularly with coal miners, the coal miners' pension benefits. This is what we're talking about with a congressional race like this. Despite all the nationalizing of this campaign, right, and Donald Trump, this is what it could ultimately come down to in a place like Washington County. In a lot of these boroughs here that we're looking at, it comes down to people like Anthony Ross. And he told me that ultimately, well, he was convinced that Donald Trump, he was a Donald Trump voter, ultimately was in his corner. He said he did not get that same assurance from Rick Saccone. When you're looking at races across the country like this is going to be a real test for particularly where those open Republican seats are here. Rick Saccone, as a general Republican candidate, should have had this race in a bag. But when you're looking at, there's about 15 other Republican open seats heading into November at this point, coming from Republicans that have decided to retire. And so what those individuals, what those Republicans, I remind you, last Tuesday, Wednesday was the first primary, and that was in Texas. So we this spring are beginning that primary season that will roll through the summer and into the fall, in which the Republican voters will ultimately pick candidates like they chose Rick Saccone to be their candidate. And if Democrats are able to field these types of candidates, I think that those, particularly those 15 open seats like Rick Saccone faced here today, are those seats that we're going to be paying extra close attention to. Because regardless of whether Rick Saccone wins tonight or not, the fact that Rick Saccone, a local entity, was this close is something to be noted.
Vaughn Hilliard, great analysis of the situation in that district. Thank you for joining us. And now we're going right back to Steve Kornacki, who has more.
Okay, I'm going to throw a bunch of numbers at you here, but basically it's reset. First of all, Conor Lamb is clinging to that lead. It sits now at 600 actually at 700 votes. Exactly 700 votes right now. Is the lead for Conor Lamb in this election. Now, what do we have left out there? Couple things. We think we have about 3,000 votes that are left here in Washington County. Again, this has been a Saccone County, Republican County. We still think there are about 700 that are left here in Westmoreland. There's also this. So, look, if these areas, if you just do the quick math of how this thing has been going, you look at that gap, you factor in that these are Republican areas, you look at the clip that Saccone's been winning them at, boy, that eats into a lot of that 700, and that makes this thing really, really coming down to the wire on that. But then the wild card emerges if Saccone eats into that Lamb lead, and we basically end up in a push situation here. There are the absentee ballots, and those are going to be counted. Not tonight. I'm not sure on every county. At least 2 of these counties will not be counting them tonight. But here's what we have on absentee ballots. It looks like more than half. There's going to be about 7,000 of them total, about 7,000 absentee ballots, it looks like, in this district. More than half of these are going to come from Allegheny County. Now, you can figure this out if you've been following along. Allegheny did not account for half the vote in this district tonight. It accounted for less, little over 40%, and yet more than 50% of the absentee ballots are from Allegheny County. And Allegheny County is Conor Lamb's sort of bedrock base of support in this district. So that, you would say, is good news for Lamb. There is also this. How do the absentee ballots usually go? Well, we can tell you in 2016 in Allegheny County, Hillary Clinton won the absentee ballots by 4 points. She lost the Allegheny County portion of this district to Trump by 4 points. So those absentee ballots in 2016 were a little bit more friendly to Clinton than the Election Day votes. And more than half of the absentee ballots that are going to be counted come from Allegheny County. So we've got 2 things that are in motion right now. Number one, the outstanding Election Day vote. Is that going to get Saccone to Lamb's number? Is he going to catch him? Is he going to come up just short? Then 2, the absentee ballots. And we're going to find out the exact procedures on the entire district and when and how we will find out about these. But that's the thing we know. It looks like the lion's share of these are in Allegheny. There are plenty that are in the rest of the district, but disproportionately, I think that's the word, disproportionately, they're in Allegheny.
That is the word, Steve, disproportionately. Thank you very much, Steve. We're going to come back to you as soon as you say we should. Cornell Belcher, if this comes down to the absentee votes, that looks like a very positive possibility for Conor Lamb.
Lawrence, I mean, I'm going to get into tactics here. Hats off to the Lamb campaign, because that doesn't happen by accident, right? That's a campaign
the absentee vote.
Right. That many absentee votes are from a Democratic area is about good old-fashioned campaign work, right? And that good old-fashioned campaign work up to this moment, I actually thought the Lamb was going to lose. If half of those absentee votes are from that Democratic area, I think he squeaks it out. Either way, recount lawyers get ready. But that is just good campaign work.
The recount situation. We're going to go back to Steve Kornacki right now.
Just quickly to complete the thought there, we said, when will the absentee ballots be counted? Green, tiny part of this in terms of total vote, but Green and Washington counties will not be counting their absentee ballots tonight. Allegheny and Westmoreland say they will get their absentee counts done by midnight. So that's a key thing to keep in mind, again, because we just said if this comes down to absentee ballots, how critical Allegheny is to Lamb. And it looks like we will get a readout from Allegheny by midnight tonight.
And Jonathan Alter, for people who didn't think they planned to watch cable news until midnight tonight, what they need to know is that the Allegheny absentee ballots are going to be counted before midnight tonight, and that is a reason to keep your TV on.
And they look like they're going to be decisive because Greene County, it's a cow county. There are very few people who live down there, and all of the population in that district is up in those Pittsburgh suburbs where people are in business and maybe they're out of town on business, so they vote absentee. And then, as Cornell indicated, you get better organization by the Democrats of the absentee ballots. That's very much like the early voting that you see in other states. A lot of that is about elbow grease. It's about who is out there organizing on the ground, old-fashioned field organizing. For all the talk of, social media campaigns and television advertising, which is in some ways becoming old-fashioned, a lot of this is ground out on the ground, at the door, the canvassing. And so that's where the energy that the Democrats have really comes in handy.
And Ron Klain, it seems that both Democrats and Republicans will take strategy lessons out of this tonight.
I think they will, Lawrence, but I think, there are a couple of big picture lessons, especially for the Democrats, or good signs. I agree with Jonathan Alter. Don't want to be overconfident about 2018, but three really great things here. One, as Cornell mentioned, it's unusual for Democrats to so outperform in delivering absentee ballots. That is a sign of Democratic enthusiasm. And that's the thing we've seen across the country. That matters. That's a trend that matters at Election Day, right? The second thing is a lot of Trump voters coming back to the Democratic Party. That's a trend that's going to count for Election Day. And the third, we talked about Trump campaigning in this district for the Republican. We need to mention the one national Democrat who campaigned in this district for Conor Lamb. My former boss, Joe Biden, who went into this district, was welcomed by Lamb, rallied the troops, and I think made a big difference for Lamb. We're going to see him all over the country this fall.
Kimberly Atkins, the enthusiasm that we're seeing tonight in the Democratic vote can be reinforced by a win in this district. That kind of enthusiasm gets contagious. Winning is the contagion that spreads it around. It's hard to make the argument to non-professionals in politics that, coming this close and losing by, half a point is hugely impressive. If the Democrats can come out of this with an actual win, that seems to be contagious.
It is. I mean, while even a close race is some good news for the Democrats, a loss will still give President Trump and other Republicans a chance to celebrate, and that could dampen that enthusiasm. You want to keep that momentum going. And I think another point in terms of how Democrats, if they want to make the kind of gains they want to see in the midterms, have to keep that enthusiasm going, is that you're talking about these absentee ballots and how it is similar to the early voting you've seen. In a lot of states, early voting has been rolled back. The state legislatures have made moves to shorten the length of time and reduce how much early voting counts. So the Democrats are going to need even more enthusiasm going to overcome some of those changes that we've seen in recent years in the voting law that have been implemented by the state legislatures.
And to Kimberly's point, Cornell, that it seems to be precisely the driving force in so many Republican efforts to basically restrict voter access.
Right, because what we see, Lawrence, is when you have a younger, more diverse electorate, it benefits Democrats, right? And it's one thing I say, America's not getting whiter, it's getting browner. And as America gets browner and Republicans refuse, quite frankly, to compete, they got to block off the access. It is a recipe for Democratic disaster. Democrat, not party, but as our democracy.
And Jonathan, you were going to the point that this is not, this Democrat running is somewhere beyond Manchin Democrat at this moment. Steve.
I haven't added enough wrinkles into this situation yet, Lawrence. I'm going to add one more. We said there's two things right now, two X factors. One is the remaining outstanding vote. No change in that since last time I came on. Two, then, is the absentee situation. Now let me give you three. State law in Pennsylvania calls for a recount if the final margin in a race is within half a percentage point, 0.5. Well, these are not the exact numbers. The exact numbers right now are Conor Lamb, 49.9%, and Rick Saccone, 49.5%. So right now, a gap of 0.4. 0.5 allows for a recount. So there is the possibility here that this ends up with a recount. There's also the possibility, of course, that the absentees are really good to Lamb, and that obviates the situation. There's also the possibility the remaining vote is really strong for Saccone, and he ends up winning this thing. But that's the other one to keep in mind, is it within half a point.
And we've got the recount music ready to go if it comes to that. Jonathan Alter, this is one of those nights where the Democratic Party has to look at itself and say and recognize what they always recognized in years past, is that a Democrat who wins in Alabama is going to be very different from a Democrat who wins in New York.
Right. This is the key thing, to not form the circular firing squad that Democrats often do, where they have very bloody primaries and they challenge each other's motives and say that, you know, the other candidate isn't pure enough on a particular issue. They have to set that all aside. The stakes are too high. And I think they will. There's some real signs of maturity on the part of a lot of voters and organizers. The big thing I'm looking for when we see, you know, if there are exit polls or when we get some breakdowns from Cornell and other pollsters, is what happened with these Republican women outside of Pittsburgh in the suburbs. Did they peel off Trump in greater than usual numbers? This district is only 7% black, which normally is bad news for Democrats if you don't have minority voters in those districts. So they're clearly, the Democrats are clearly getting a lot of suburban women, and they will hold the key. White suburban women will hold the key to whether the Democrats regain control of Congress.
And joining our conversation now is McKay Coppins. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic magazine, and he's the author of The Wilderness, deep inside the Republican Party's combative, contentious, chaotic quest to take back the White House. And McKay, you have great sources on the Republican side of the world and in Trump world. It seems that a few hundred voters in this district may be the ones who decide whether Donald Trump condemns the candidate that he backed in this election or takes full credit for the win.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We can basically guess what the early morning tweets from the president are going to be tomorrow morning, depending entirely on the outcome of the election. The question for me is, you know, if this is actually, if tonight is actually about political narratives going into the rest of the midterms, given all the peculiarities of this district, the question is, you know, Jonathan was getting at it earlier, what are Democrats willing to do in other races? Are they willing to let candidates like Conor Lamb, a pro-gun, anti-Pelosi, relatively moderate candidate, win in primaries where they're going to need to be like that to win general elections? I think it's possible, but the thing that's most struck me about his campaign is the degree to which Lamb has not talked about Trump on the campaign trail. My colleague Elaine Godfrey was there just last week, I believe, and she was covering this, and she was saying, you know, he might be the only Democrat in the country who doesn't want to talk about Donald Trump. Now, he's benefiting from the anti-Trump energy that's in the Democratic base, but he's talking about issues, kitchen table issues that his voters care about in the district. He doesn't want to make this a referendum on Trump, and I'm curious to see if other Democrats in red districts are willing to follow that playbook the rest of this year.
Well, they always were in the past, and especially when they had the big margins in their favor in the House of Representatives and the Senate. But, McKay, I want you to tell us what happens inside the Republican caucus room in the House of Representatives tomorrow, no matter which way this goes. I mean, they're professionals. All those Republican House members in that room with Paul Ryan tomorrow, they know what happened here. If their guy squeaks it out by a couple hundred votes, there's going to be a tremendous worry in that room tomorrow, no matter who squeaks out this win.
The worry has already settled in. Talking to Republican strategists the last couple of days, they're all pointing to this race. Regardless of what happens, they know that it's closer than it should be. They know that their candidate is severely underperforming. And for whatever weaknesses Saccone has, he's a relatively standard Republican candidate. And so running on the issues he's running on, being a Republican this year and underperforming to the extent that he is, you talk to Republican strategists, and they're saying we need to figure out almost on the fly if there's a new message we should be adopting as a party, how we're going to handle the Trump factor. It's interesting because you hear from these Republicans, and they're basically talking about pressing the panic button and figuring out how to recalibrate their whole midterm strategy. And we're already, we're only months away from some of these races unfolding. So it's something that Republicans are already aware of. And regardless of what happens tonight, this is only another kind of element of the general crisis that they could be facing in the midterms.
I can now tell when Steve Kornacki has something to say, simply by the way he moves toward the camera. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, let me set the situation for you. A couple new things to tell you. The margin right now, Conor Lamb leads by 755 votes over Rick Saccone. Saccone is trying to make this up first with the votes that are left. First of all, we can tell you, Allegheny County, this is sort of the heart of Conor Lamb country. All of the Election Day vote, that's in. The only thing left out of Allegheny County right now is going to be the absentee ballots. We talked about those a little bit earlier. So Conor Lamb getting no more Election Day votes out of Allegheny. The other big thing we've been looking for in terms of the remaining Election Day vote is right here in Washington County. There are 9, we believe 9 precincts left in Washington County that have yet to report. How is this for drama? They are in transit and expected to be known in the next 20 minutes. So in the next 20 minutes...
Transit to where, Steve? Where are they going?
I'm going to get an answer for you. Hopefully right here. Hopefully right here in 30 Rock. Here's what I can tell you about those 9 precincts that are left, though, in Washington County. Remember, Saccone got to run up the score to make up those 755 votes. I'm going to give you the Trump percentage in these remaining precincts. And remember, Saccone has been trailing that by about 8 points. Here we go. 65, 65, 61, 65, 61, 64, 62, 65, 62. Pretty consistent, low, mid-60s. If the law of averages holds on this, you'd knock 8 points off that. Is that going to be enough? These are pretty small precincts here. Is that going to be enough to knock 755 off the total? That's the drama in the next 20 minutes, we think.
And the question then becomes, Steve, as all the third-grade math students out there know, is how many votes are in that pile that we just talked about in those precincts?
And I can, maybe they can. I got my little thing set up here. I can give you a couple examples. This is what we're talking about. We're looking, for instance, one where Trump got 61%. We expect about 350, this is rough, about 350 votes. That's probably what I would expect to come out of there. 350 votes. If you look up, it's right down here. I'm looking at it. I'm going to give it to you in 5 seconds. Put me on the clock. 800, 700. Maybe about 400. So you're talking hundreds of votes in these precincts. Some are closer to 1,000, some are closer, to 200, 300. But yeah, and if you're looking at a clip there of about 56, 57%, maybe a little bit less for Saccone, you can start to do a little bit of the back of the envelope calculations.
And the back of my envelope says that he could pick up Saccone if he performs according to the formula you're suggesting, could pick up maybe 50 votes in one precinct, 100 votes in another precinct, and maybe another 100 here and there, and it could get to 700, or it could come in shy of 700. We don't know.
Yep. And then we go, of course, as we said, the absentee ballots, and then, of course, all the action there would be shifting to Allegheny, where by midnight tonight we expect to know.
Yeah, and so there, Steve, if we were to project even some kind of tie coming out of the little package that we just talked about in those precincts tonight, we would not be projecting a tie coming out of those 1,400 absentee ballots in Allegheny. That would be projecting very much in favor of Lamb.
Yeah, and we're looking, I think, more than 1,400, I think, out of Allegheny. Now, look, this is, we're getting into, like, we're reading what the past usually is. World is full of surprises in the era of Trump, but what we know from past experience, and certainly what we know from the 2016 election, is that Hillary Clinton performed better in the absentee votes in Allegheny County than she did in the election day. Won the absentee by 4, lost the election day by 4, a swing of 8 points there. We also know, just based on the number of absentee ballots that are out there, we also know that more than half are going to come out of Allegheny County. So certainly if you're a Democrat, that's encouraging news, but we got to say we're sort of getting into that territory here where funny things can happen.
Steve, you've given the viewers every single number they need to carry themselves through that. You're going to have more. more, and we all now know pretty much exactly where we stand. Ron Klain, I want to go to you as this hour sort of approaches a close. Obviously, we're not going to have a winner in this hour. We might have a winner tonight. We might have something of a de facto winner if all that's left to count are those Allegheny absentee ballots, since we could safely project something that would favor Lamb in that outcome. But this is the election that was slow to grab public attention, but finally did, especially did on Saturday night when Donald Trump went to the district and tried to push this candidate over the top. And here we are tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I know a thing or two about recounts, and they're not fun, but that could be where we're headed here.
Are you available, Mr. Klein,
Yeah,
for
exactly.
a recount? Given your Florida experience, would you like to?
He might want someone who won a recount this time. But look, one last observation, though, Lawrence, I'd like to make, which is 2018 is a midterm unlike any other, because it's the first time ever where you've had a record number of retirements by the party that's in power. And what that means is we've talked a lot tonight about who the Democrats will select to run in 2018. The Republicans are going to have to nominate a lot of new candidates in 2018 too. And if they nominate people like Rick Saccone, that's going to further add to their difficulties in the House. So Democrats have to be careful about who they nominate. Republicans have an unprecedented nomination challenge, and so far they're not picking very well. Roy Moore, not a great candidate. Rick Saccone, also not a great candidate.
Kimberly Atkins, the reaction among the professionals, if we can call them that, in the Trump administration, since the president's reaction is not that interesting, it's just going to be an emotional reaction and self-glorifying or condemning of the Republican loser if he's a loser. But within the Trump administration, is there anyone who will react to this as an adult?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, I think the president's voice is the one that sort of drowns out everyone else's, but the people within the White House should be very concerned by this wave. Look, as difficult as it is for the president and the White House to get anything on its agenda done, now it's going to be that much worse with a split House. If the Democrats take back the House, it will be near impossible. It would ratchet up talk of impeachment, since it is the House that can bring articles of impeachment. If it comes to that, it will be a much bigger headache than they have now. So they should be doing everything that they can to try to get a Republican message, try to help vet out potential candidates and whatever they can do to hold on to the House, because that's absolutely crucial to the White House agenda.
McKay Coppins, if you were the manager of the Republican campaign, or if you're the candidate Saccone, the one thing you wanted from the Trump White House today on Election Day, the one thing you wanted was stability. You would like to have had one day where it looked like an actual White House. Instead, you wake up to he has fired the Secretary of State, who has called the president a moron in the past. You have scandals around Kellyanne Conway's use of private aircraft, similar to what brought down one of the cabinet members. You have the story of a White House aide being basically dragged out of the building yesterday because he has problems with online gambling and possibly tax crimes. That's just today in the Trump White House. And the question in that district tonight is, do you send someone to Washington to support Donald Trump and what's going on in that White House, or do you send someone who might just resist it a little bit?
That's right. And, you know, one of the most common complaints, maybe the most common complaint you hear from Republicans on Capitol Hill when you have conversations in private or off the record or on background, is that this president does not care about the party. He does not care about the congressional majority, or at least doesn't show that he cares with the way that he acts. Every time they're on the brink of a major legislative accomplishment.
McKay, I have to go to Steve Kornacki.
Sure, yeah.
I can tell he's got something for us.
Yeah, I think we got something significant here. I was saying, look out for 20 minutes. It might have been a little sooner. You can see, first of all, in the overall count in the district right now, look at that margin. We're inside 100 votes. It is 95. And remember, we've been talking about, 500, 600, 700. So it's shrunk. Why has it come down? I believe, and bear with me because I'm going through it right now, I am checking the precincts. We said Washington's where we're looking for all those sort of Trump districts or those Trump precincts. I believe we've got them in from Washington right now. I am looking at my list, and I am not seeing an outstanding precinct in Washington. So I believe we now have the answer about Washington County. I got to see if we've got anything left here in Westmoreland tonight. But otherwise, we know Allegheny's in. I believe Washington is in. We know Greene is in. I'm going to get you the final here on Westmoreland. And, yeah, we're sitting there at, we're going to check that. We're sitting here at 49-7, 49-7. As you can see, 95 votes. We may have another precinct or two. I got to check. But I think we're basically looking at the Election Day total here with Conor Lamb, the Democrat, leading by 95 votes. And remember, we then go into absentee ballots.
Steve, you know, in my calculations here, I actually wrote 95. As, before, when you told me all that stuff about the precincts, Cornell Belcher, no, but it did look like the numbers that Steve laid out for us before, if you were doing them in your head, it was coming out to roughly something like that. Or a tie. That's why I kept saying a tie. And there you are. I mean, there you are at a statistical tie. The Allegheny absentees look like they're going to decide this, and they will probably decide this in favor of Conor.
And Lawrence, some young man or woman in the Lamb campaign who works the field and is in charge of absentee ballot probably won him that district tonight.
Yeah, Jonathan Alder.
Well, just every generation has to learn anew that every vote counts. So it's almost 18 years now since the 2000 election that Ron Klain was involved in, where just the presidential election came down to just a few hundred votes. But you've had a whole generation of millennials now, and they need to learn this lesson anew, because the tendency is to say, oh, my vote doesn't really count. So many millions of people vote. Who cares whether I show up? And this is real proof that it really does matter whether you get out there and vote.
We are approaching our last minute of coverage here, and I just want to thank Steve Kornacki. Steve, I want to thank you directly. I would say take a break, but I know you won't. No. And I know Brian Williams is going to use you most minutes in the next hour. But Steve, thank you very much for getting us through this and guiding us through it mathematically to where when we got to 95, it wasn't so much of a surprise because you had led us right up to it. Really appreciate it. And a last word, Steve, before you go.
Yeah, no, and thanks for letting me ride along, by the way. I love getting to do this stuff. Yeah, I mean, look, we're just checking on final precincts, but the last thing quickly here, 3,500 requested absentee ballots out of Allegheny, 1,800 out of Westmoreland, 203 out of Greene, about 1,140 out of Washington. So if this is the entire Election Day vote, that's what's left.
And that is the last word. Steve Kornacki gets the last word. I want to thank Ron Klain, Cornell Belcher, Jonathan Alder, McKay Coppins, Kimberly Atkins. Thank you all for joining us for this extraordinary hour. Coming up, much more special election coverage in Pennsylvania. The 11th hour with Brian Williams starts right now.
The breaking news we continue to follow at the top of the hour. A later than expected night for a lot of folks in southwestern Pennsylvania and by extension in the news media across the country, as this is the barn burner we've been covering all night, a race too close to call. You see the difference there, though. The numbers have been changing throughout the night between Lamb and Saccone, vying for a special election, a very temporary election to the House of Representatives. We say that because the map is being smashed with a hammer and redrawn in the state of Pennsylvania for political purposes. Our man Steve Kornacki, our national political correspondent, has been earning his salary tonight at the big board, and especially watching. This has come down to absentee ballots. It's come down to exhausting the raw vote tonight. We are fortunate that they apparently are diligent bookkeepers in southwestern Pennsylvania, Steve.
Yeah, we're going to have one holdout. I'll get to that in a minute. It may not matter because we just got a big dose of clarity. We've been sitting on these numbers for so long. We now have, just to reset here, 579 votes. That's the lead for Conor Lamb in this thing. What is now just done and off the board? All of Allegheny, and now I can confirm. I thought this was the case. This is definitely the case. Westmoreland, it's all in. The absentee is in. Those two outstanding precincts are in. all of the election day is in. So now all that's left in this district, we move down to Washington and Greene. We know Greene is a tiny county. We're looking at, and I say I love tiny counties, but you're sitting at 200 absentee votes that are going to be counted there in Greene, and you're looking at 1195 in Washington. So it's basically we're sitting at 1,400 is all that's left. 1,400 ballots, and again with a lead of 579. Oh, boy. So, you're looking at like Saccone would have to get, 90% or something in this. And again, we just saw he probably is going to lose ground in the Washington absentees. We'll see about Greene. But look, this 579, that may be the baseline for what's left in these absentees for a Lamb. It may go up. That becomes key, the question of whether it goes up or not, because what this means right now, let me clear this board, what this means right now with those votes left, Lamb is sitting at 49.9, Saccone is sitting at 49.6, a difference of 0.3 of a point. Now, there's this confusing law. Does it apply to congressional districts or not? Well, if it does, under 0.5 is an automatic recount. If Lamb somehow could climb that, get that over 0.5, that question would be off the table. As it is, that looks like maybe an outstanding question that emerges. But again, it looks like Lamb's going to end this thing in terms of the election day vote, in terms of the absentee vote, in terms of everything we could possibly add up and tell you about. It is looking like he's going to end up on the plus side in this thing, and then it just becomes a question of, is there some kind of recount?
All right, Steve Kornacki, I'm hoping for your sake you can go into some kind of a standby or preheat mode, and when we get new numbers, just wave at us again. Okay. We're going to go to Casey Hunt at Conor Lamb headquarters, and after Casey, no pressure, Ashley Parker, so she can get ready for Wednesday, which just started 3 minutes ago. So, Casey, you're on. What do you have to report from there?
Well, Brian, the crowd here is slowly dwindling. They are still waiting for Conor Lamb to come up on the stage. One of his supporters came up and said that he wanted to thank them, but that he wasn't ready to do anything one way or the other, asked them all to stay put. Rick Saccone, as you saw, already spoke to the crowd there, said, hey, you got to get home for the evening. But so far, we have not yet heard from Conor Lamb. That has not stopped the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee from already declaring victory and calling tonight's results terrifying for Republicans. The NRCC, the Republican arm, has essentially said the opposite. They are digging in, looking to count every legal vote, as they put it. So we haven't seen an official statement from Conor Lamb's campaign declaring victory or anything like that. And like I said, we're still waiting for him to talk. But again, Brian, as we were talking about before, this is clearly something that shows Democrats are in a much different position going into the midterm elections than they were, obviously, in 2016. And that enthusiasm gap, I think Steve Kornacki might be able to make up for it all by himself if he just kind of bottled his enthusiasm. Might explain the gap here the Democrats are experiencing in Pennsylvania. But we are seeing them here at this event in real time. We saw it in the yard signs, anecdotally driving around in this district. And, we hit on the fact that a big chunk of this is suburban. That's, I think, really where a lot of these races are going to be won and lost. The state of Pennsylvania broadly going to be critical in the fall. But, as much as Republicans are going to try to spin this as closer than they told us they thought it was going to be at 6 o'clock tonight, this is really not great news for them at the end of the day. Brian.
Casey Hunt, a veteran of the AP and a veteran on-the-ground political reporter who knows that yard signs are as measurable as any other indicator in a campaign. A lot of us saw the Trump yard signs overwhelming the Hillary yard signs in places that later broke that way. Casey, thank you. Ashley Parker started day 418 of the Trump administration with an exclusive breaking story that the Secretary of State was on his way out. Ashley, we've just passed the yard arm into day 419. You wake up earlier than any of us. You're more than generous with your time. So I just have one more note about the Tillerson departure. I've heard some people comment on this, that in their fraught relationship, Rex Tillerson, captain of industry. At the end of the day, Rex Tillerson was a very proud Eagle Scout, and he is a very proud member of the board of Boy Scouts of America. If you've had Eagle Scouts in your life, you know how proud a subset they are of the American population. of all the taking of offense they had back and forth, he was deeply offended by the president's performance at the Boy Scout Jamboree. They had just days earlier presented him with a medal that touched him very deeply. But it's these kinds of things. Yes, we're talking about President of the United States and Secretary of State, as I keep saying, a job occupied by Jefferson and Madison, among others. But it kind of went south from there.
It certainly did. And on the one hand, obviously, what happened with the president at the Boy Scouts Jamboree is not why Rex Tillerson was forced out today. But it was another thing that sort of added insult to injury. You remember the president showed up at that Jamboree. He was invited in West Virginia, and he basically held a campaign-style rally and brought politics to the Boy Scouts, which is just something you don't do. So Tillerson was offended by that. But I do have to say that this relationship began fracturing almost from the very first day. The president chose him in part because he was impressed with the Texan swagger. He felt like he was out of central casting, the broad shoulders, the silver hair. But what he didn't like was sort of that swagger and that confidence, and that Rex Tillerson entered the job sort of behaving as a principal himself. And he stated his own views. He broke with the president quite publicly on a number of policy issues. Trump always complained he was, quote, too establishment in his thinking. The president was also frustrated that Tillerson, became clear, didn't think very highly of him, and instead of just leaking it to the press and like some other people in that White House, he would sort of be arrogant and condescending in meetings. You guys reported that he called the president a moron at one point. So there was a long list of things that finally led up to today when the president sort of unceremoniously fired him. It stunned Washington, but on the whole, it wasn't necessarily unexpected.
Ashley Parker, a terrific friend of our broadcast, thank you so much for a day of your reporting that's become a night of your reporting as well. Ashley, in this exclusive story, we should tell our audience, was one half of a writing team of Ashley Parker and Philip Rucker. Philip is remaining for us to take a question before we let Philip go pursue his life and get ready for a full day 419. And that is, Philip, I've heard you asked various strands of this today. What does this episode, firing a senior official by Twitter, say about Donald Trump?
Well, it says a couple of things. Donald Trump is someone who became famous in sort of pop culture for saying you're fired, for firing people on reality television, but he doesn't seem to have what it takes to do that in person as president. We've seen it time and again where he's fired people unceremoniously. He sent his bodyguard, Keith Schiller, over to the Department of Justice to deliver that letter to Jim Comey, and Comey found out from news reports when he was in Los Angeles, you'll remember last spring, Reince Priebus was dumped on the tarmac of Air Force One in the rain as the White House chief of staff. We've seen this time and again, and it played out in pretty horrible way for Rex Tillerson. I mean, Josh Letterman was on the air a little bit earlier talking about this. Tillerson was actually asleep in his hotel room in Nairobi in the middle of the night Saturday with a stomach bug. He had fallen ill on that trip to Africa, which, as you mentioned, Brian, was to really clean up a mess that the president had created with his comments calling African countries S-hole countries. And so Tillerson's there doing his cleanup job, finds out the president's mad, doesn't quite know what to make of that, but apparently that was supposed to be the signal to him that he was about to get fired. Meanwhile, Ashley and I and our colleague Josh Dawsey yesterday were hearing all sorts of rumors at the White House from the sources we were talking to that the president was about to make a move on Tillerson. Tillerson just seems to be the one who didn't know.
As we always tell to our viewers, don't tell anyone that our broadcast every night is actually about print journalism and the people who are producing such astounding and outstanding print journalism every day. Philip Rucker, Ashley Parker among them. Thank you, friend. We'll let you go for tonight and pursue tomorrow. Steve Kornacki, who I guess we're going to live in a split-screen world, Steve. You might as well get used to this. We're on every night from 11 to 12. Unless we have a barn burner in Pennsylvania, then we do a 2-hour shift. Do you have anything further by way of updated numbers?
No. I have a number. It's not a new one, but to just give you a little context to what's happening here. We're waiting, as we said, Washington Green, based on your interview with that county clerk. She said 3 hours. They were just opening. That's probably after 2 a.m. They're going to count these in Washington. Again, Saccone to catch Lamb in the election day. almost has to win every single one of those. That's what he's up against. The reason, I think, one of the keys here to keep in mind as we start to analyze this, why Lamb is leading right now, and I think in such a strong position. We know he did really well in Allegheny County, the Pittsburgh suburbs. The other thing we're seeing in these numbers in Allegheny County is the turnout level. I think there was higher turnout here in these Pittsburgh suburbs than there was in the rest of the district. It looks like about 45% of all votes that were cast in this district today came out of Allegheny. That's higher than in the 2016 election. In the 2016 election, we were talking a lot about surge turnout in areas like this, these outlying rural areas where Trump did so well. What you're seeing here is more of a surge, I think, in this special election in these suburbs. When you look at a margin that close, the difference between 45% of the vote coming out of Allegheny and 43, like in 2016, that's a big difference.
Sorry, Steve. I had
Yes.
someone talking to me. I thought you paused to get numbers.
No, I mean, honestly, I'll get a level with you. I'm happy to talk as much as we can, and you know, I don't think we're getting new numbers until, you know, based on your interview with the county clerk, which is the best information out there right now in the world on this. She estimated 3 hours. She said she's going in to count with her team. It's going to be 3 hours.
Yep.
That's 1,200 absentee ballots in Washington, and the folks in green, I think they've gone to sleep for the night. So Washington's probably the last piece of numerical information we're going to get. Maybe they're super fast down there. Maybe she's anxious to get home and her team is. But if she's true to what she told you, I think about 2 a.m. we're getting numbers out of there. I'm taking you through where I think that's going to go. It would take something beyond a miracle for Saccone to catch Lamb in those numbers. But I think that's the next time we're going to get those numbers.
And by the way, we don't blame anyone in Greene County for turning in early. They've had a day of off and on snow. They're probably exhausted. And they've had
2 o'clock. We're going to have to vamp.
They've had
we got a lot of vamping to do to get through to 2 a.m.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, John Howman, while I have you, the subject of Russia. A friend of mine, when this race tightened tonight, half in jest, got in touch and said, are the Russians in southwestern Pennsylvania? And I know what he was saying, half in jest.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that can decrease your confidence in our elections and your democracy, the role Russia has suddenly played in American life. The president has had a kind of obvious carve-out. He has bent over backwards not to lay blame at Putin writ small and the Russians writ large. How big a factor was Russia in the disconnect between Trump and his now former Secretary of State?
Well, I think, look, there's no doubt that Tillerson he's not been outspoken, particularly outspoken on Russia. He's someone who we thought when he first came in, because of his relationship with Putin, was someone that Trump was picking, partly because he would reinforce Trump's desire to have a friendlier, softer relationship with Russia, because, as we know, Tillerson was great friends with Putin.
ExxonMobil.
And Putin had given him medals and all that stuff. The other, at the end of this trip, when Putin weighed in on the question of what's going on in Britain right now, it seemed either like he knew he was on his way out the door and suddenly felt free to speak his mind on Russia, or potentially it was the last nail in the coffin, where Trump had already decided he was going to let him go, but then he heard Tillerson say that, and that may have driven him
at how much clarity Tillerson spoke with.
Suddenly all this clarity. I do want to say one thing about Tillerson, just because Trump treated him terribly, and we always we rightly look at this relationship. You kind of immediately, when someone's been fired, you want to feel sympathy for them,
sure,
especially at the hands of Donald Trump in this sort of thuggish way.
Yep.
But the reality is, we've covered enough. In Washington, you've got these big departments. The Justice Department, the Defense Department, the State Department, Treasury, the Big Four. They're big jobs.
Yeah.
And the reality is, there's a lot of constituencies in them. There's no doubt that Rex Tillerson lost his job because he didn't manage the most important constituency, the constituency of one, and maybe there was no way that he could make Donald Trump happy. But the other reality is that Rex Tillerson really did not have a constituency anywhere that was on his side.
No.
People at the State Department thought he was a terrible manager. He was gutting the State Department, reducing its
30%.
workforce 30%. Didn't seem to have any respect for career diplomats who were there. So he had no constituency within the building. He didn't have a constituency on Capitol Hill. He didn't have a constituency in the press. For the longest time, our friend Andrew Mitchell would stand there and try to get him to answer questions for months.
Yep.
Forget about this at the beginning of 2017. And he would ignore her. He wouldn't take the press initially on his trips around the world. Something that secretaries of state always do, is take their press corps. His first couple big trips, he didn't take anybody with him. There was no one on his side. He seemed to think that he could arrive in Washington and that he didn't have to do any of the things that every cabinet secretary, but especially if you run one of those big four agencies, you got to cultivate hopefully all of those constituencies, but if not all of them, some of them. And he had none of them. And so I feel sympathy for the guy for how he was treated by Donald Trump, but I got to say, he brought a lot of his failure in this job, and it was a failure. He brought a lot of this failure on himself.
To our control room, if we can dial up the graphics Andrea Mitchell prepared for tonight about the State Department that Rex Tillerson leaves behind, people are scurrying.
It's a hollowed out. Are these the numbers that are going to show? It's a hollowed out husk of a building.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Key ambassadors not appointed. And very typically in the headlines these days, South Korea, 38 of them. Assistant secretary vacancies, 16, and undersecretary vacancies. And sooner or later, you're talking about the leadership structure of the U.S. Department of State, 6. That is saying a lot.
Yes, he seemed, look, all of these departments in Washington could use some restructuring and some rationalization, and many of them probably could do with being a little smaller. But this is a place in which there's so much of a repository of knowledge about the world, this complicated world in which we live. And this guy, who obviously does know a lot about the world, Rex Tillerson, Exxon is like a nation state. This is someone who knew a lot about the world on the economic level and the strategic level, on the level of energy, obviously. So he brought a lot of actual intellectual capital himself to the job, which made it all the stranger that he seemed to have so little regard for these career public servants, civil servants who had been in these jobs for so long, accumulating all of this wisdom across parties, people who'd worked for Democrats and Republicans for years and years and years, and Rex Tillerson seemed to come in and say, I don't need you here. I don't care about your service. I don't care what you know. It's not relevant to what I'm here to do. And I think that is both foolish and also self-defeating. It's part of the reason why he no longer has his job, in addition to all of the conflicts he had with Donald Trump. And if you think about those, just remember, he called him a moron and then didn't do what everybody else around Trump does when they get on his bad side, which is they go out and lie for him. He refused to go out and say, oh, I never said that. He kept, people would say it day after day, up until a couple days ago. People were still saying, did you say that thing about Trump? Did you call him a moron? He would refuse to say, no, I didn't. Nor would he refuse. He would also refuse to say, yes, I did, which, of course, gave the president the sense that, yeah, he probably said it. And that's another reason why he was doomed.
And there's one more thing. When you spend any time in Washington, there are 4 words that fill people with pride when you meet them, and that is career foreign service officer.
Yes.
Rex Tillerson did not venerate that title as much as prior secretaries of state. Another break for us. When we come back, we will reset the scene in southwestern Pennsylvania. The breaking political news. We are following the race that is so far too close to call. We are back. Here's a quick look at a glance at the breaking news we're covering. Here it is, 12:23 a.m. East Coast time when we are airing this for the first time. Difference of 579 separates these 2 men in a race that it's fairly clear is going to come down to kind of count, recount, and absentee ballots. We'll have an update on this in just a second, but because of the nature of this day and tonight, we are balancing competing news stories and competing interests, and for that, we are happy to be joined by telephone by John Brennan, former director of the CIA and newly minted MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Director Brennan, I'm very curious to get your take on the personnel moves today that followed the word that Rex Tillerson would be leaving as Secretary of State. We'll take them first things first, and that is Mr. Pompeo leaves your old agency and goes to State, and it is said that he made an impression on Donald Trump by being his daily briefer. I know it is a role you served in for Bill Clinton in '94 and '95. So your opinion of Mr. Pompeo as he goes over to State from CIA?
Well, I think that Mike Pompeo has demonstrated over the last 14 months that he is a very loyal and strong supporter of Donald Trump. and someone who has been able to establish good rapport with him, which is a real positive when it comes to having a Secretary of State who is aligned with a president. So I think Donald Trump saw in Mike Pompeo someone who obviously is very smart. He also was very... Well, that's a good question. I think when pressed, he has had to say that he certainly supports the CIA assessment about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. And he has met with his Russian counterparts. I hope he's going to take a very firm and hard line with the Russians. I think Russian activities continues around the globe. We see recent indications in the UK that, at least according to the British reports, that the Russians likely were involved in the poisoning of the individual and the daughter. So I think it's critically important for the Secretary of State, if he is confirmed, to hold a hard line and also make sure that Donald Trump understands just how dangerous the Russians can be and the need to demonstrate strength and resolve toward them.
Of course, this move creates a vacancy at your beloved former headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and for that, the president has put forward the name of Gina Haspel, a veteran of the CIA, but not without controversy herself because of her involvement. There are degrees, people argue, of her involvement in torture at black sites after 9/11. Now, I heard a longtime colleague of hers say on television today, let's not judge her for actions in 2002 based solely on 2018 standards. And by this, he meant that we were all some form of crazy back then. We were all mourning, we were all shaken, and we had kind of given our proxy to a whole lot of people at the top of our government to do what it was required to keep us safe. And a whole lot of Democrats and a whole lot of Republicans had given the president and his administration a lot of leeway. So having set that up for our audience, your view professionally of Gina Haspel, who is the nominee to take over as head of CIA.
Well, 2 points. First of all, Gina is a exceptionally well-respected professional within CIA. She has held a number of senior-level positions over the years and has acquitted herself very competently. And I think she has the experience, the breadth and depth on intelligence issues and dealing with these nettlesome foreign policy issues for many, many years, so that she will be able to provide that unvarnished, apolitical, objective intelligence input to Donald Trump and to others. Secondly, yes, the CIA was involved in a very controversial program, the detention interrogation program, but let's not forget that that was a program that was directed and authorized by President Bush, and it was deemed lawful by the Department of Justice. And CIA officers, including Gina Haspel at the time, carried out those responsibilities to the best of their ability. There were some CIA officers that were held to account for excesses during that time. But Gina, by all of my recollection, was not involved in anything that was not authorized, albeit controversial. So I do think that her role in that program will be subject to scrutiny by the Senate Intelligence Committee, and rightly so. But I have confidence that Gina is going to be able to provide them a full and honest accounting of her role and her actions during that time.
And last question, the part of her role that smacks of skullduggery, especially if you listen to some of the Democrats who intend to oppose it, is her alleged role in the destruction of video evidence of acts of torture. Can you speak to that allegation?
Well, at least by the reports that have been circulated.
We're awfully happy to have you of counsel around here, and thank you very much for making time to join us by telephone on this busy night. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn. Good to talk to you.
Former CIA Director John Brennan, who, becoming of counsel to us, joins the likes of Mike McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an MSNBC international affairs analyst, and retired four-star U.S. Army General Barry McCaffrey, decorated combat veteran from the Vietnam War, former battlefield commander in the Persian Gulf, who is now an MSNBC military analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to you. And Ambassador, I'll start with you. Where do you think today's personnel moves leave us or set us up vis-a-vis Russia?
Well, vis-a-vis Russia, I'm not ready to say yet, because you've had a real gap between what the president says and believes about the Russia policy and the rest of the administration. And there's nothing that I've heard from Mr. Pompeo that makes me believe that he's different from where Mattis or H.R. McMaster are in terms of standing up to the Russians. The problem has always been the president doesn't support his administration's policy towards Russia. This change at the Secretary of State is not going to change that basic fact.
Barry McCaffrey, the Secretary of State designate, spent a little bit of time in your beloved U.S. Army, first in his class, West Point. Not an easy undertaking. Goes on to Harvard Law. Along the way, serves to the rank of captain in the Army. Comes into the House as part of the Tea Party wave, and the rest has become kind of contemporary history. Where do you put his chances at the State Department, with special concentration on his potential dealings with the Russians?
Well, I think the ambassador really put it in the correct context. The problem is going to be the President of the United States, who, for some reason not yet discernible, has ignored an authoritarian, corrupt demagogue who threatens his neighbors, who has eliminated democratic opposition inside the country, and who's causing enormous problems to U.S. national interests in the Middle East and the Ukraine and elsewhere. So, I mean, that's the issue. Now, look, Mike Pompeo is a very capable person. I don't think there's any, he'll have no illusion about what the Russians are up to. The question will become, to what extent can he educate, can he shape the dialogue going forward? And I think he'll do better than Secretary Tillerson, who I think is a very fine man, but for some reason, it's not clear to me, with his background, he still was a disaster as Secretary of the State. So I think this is good news, as is the nominee to replace him in the CIA. She's a professional. This is good news for American national security.
General, what does it say to the wider world that our guy at the head of the State Department wakes up in Africa, flies home, is fired by Twitter, and that this is how we change the cabinet room chairs?
Well, look, you know, there's a body of people in the government at the highest levels that actually trust each other. They've known each other for years. They're experts at their business. The interagency process actually works quite well. And part of it's because the cabinet officials are women and men of dignity and integrity. Boy, that's getting ruined. We got islands of competence still in the government, but this is no way to shape a team. The president has stepped forward with unilateral push to become the chief diplomat in almost every manner. So watch what happens with dealing with the North Koreans. I mean, at the end of the day, North Korea is not going to denuclearize. They're not going to improve human rights. So what is it that President Trump will give them starting in May that may not be favorable for U.S. national interests?
Ambassador, perhaps you heard me use the facts and figures that Andrea Mitchell had compiled for us just tonight about the hollowing out of the State Department. Perhaps you heard me refer to the new pejorative among some in Washington, career Foreign Service officer. Since you were one, do you have a fear that Pompeo's charge is still going to be find me 30%, like a Washington's birthday white sale, and cut it out of the middle at the State Department? Or do you think that there's something about Mike Pompeo that's going to want to restore its institutional luster?
Hard question, Brian. I hope that we're not just worrying about cutting the budget by 30%. And Secretary Tillerson did not do any, did not win over any of those Foreign Service officers. But here's the problem that he's going to face. On the one hand, he has a much closer relationship to the president. And from what we've been hearing from reporting today on policy issues, they're closer together on issues like Iran and like North Korea. But that may put him at odds with the career Foreign Service people. And so you might have a Secretary of State that's closer to the president on policy, but doesn't actually win over the rest of the building. His first job, though, I just really want to underscore this, is just putting together a team in place. If we just talk about Korea, let's just talk about we do not have an ambassador in South Korea. The top North Korean person just resigned. The Undersecretary for Arms Control and the Assistant Secretary for Arms Control, the people that are usually involved in negotiations about nuclear weapons, those are all unfilled positions. So if he's a real leader there, the first thing he wants to do is just put a team on the field. Diplomacy is a team sport. That should be the first thing that he does once he gets confirmed.
Ambassador General, gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. I know it's late at night when we've been, our attention has been pulled in several different directions, but we would not try to have this conversation without both of you. Thank you both very much, General McCaffrey and Ambassador McFaul. Over to the big board, Steve Kornacki, we've been watching you while we've been having our conversation. You've been consulting with your team and looking at your giant laptop. What do you have?
All right, we got some more numbers for you just to kind of further clarify the situation. Again, Conor Lamb leads by 579 votes district-wide right now. We've been talking about this idea that the absentee ballots end up favoring Democrats even in these red areas. We got a little more information on that. We said a while ago everything came in Westmoreland. That includes the absentee ballots. Look at this. In the Election Day vote here in Westmoreland, this is the harder Republican, really, 18th district here. In the Election Day vote, Saccone won by 15 points. Then they went and they counted up the absentee ballots, and Saccone went and he won it by 4 points. So in this big Republican county where Saccone's trying to make up all those votes, he only beat Lamb by 4 points in those 1,800 or so absentee ballots that were counted. That's why he didn't make a real dent, really any dent in that lead. So again, and you can see we've been speculating. It's still speculation. We got to see, but certainly history says this will happen. What we've seen tonight says this will happen. You know, Lamb ran ahead in his absentee votes in Allegheny. He's done it in Westmoreland, you know, and in Washington, where again, you know, tonight Saccone's running 53% in the Election Day vote in Washington. That's the Election Day. If this same thing happens, that's an 11-point difference. If that happened, you know, Saccone's going to be sitting down there at 42 in the absentee ballot. He could lose significant ground to Lamb. And again, down here in green, there's only 200. We won't know till tomorrow. What this is all building towards right now is just this question of, is there going to be a recount? We think a candidate can request one if it's not within this threshold we've been talking about, 0.5. I think Saccone might be able to request one if he pays for it. I think that might be an issue. But right now, the gap between these candidates sits at 0.26. 0.5, we think may be the trigger. This law is very nebulous, but if that is the trigger, it sits at 0.26. What that would set up is these remaining absentees and maybe even a scattering of provisionals. That we've shown you what's left, though, basically. Lamb's got to basically get 2/3 of what's left if he wants to push that 0.26 over that 0.5. But again, that's just getting this question of if there's going to be a recount. If there's a recount at this margin, boy, I mean, you see it. Lamb goes into it with this is not a 4-vote race we're talking about here. We are talking about, it's close, but that's also hundreds of votes separating them.
Well, I love your decimals and I love your ratios. I also love your caution. And we're reminded on every election night that over the door of the National Archives, it says, what's past is prologue, except in electoral politics sometimes, as you always remind us. Steve Kornacki, thank you. We won't disturb you. Go back to your numbers and your giant laptop. Let's go to a veteran journalist out at Conor Lamb headquarters. Before seeing the light and joining the home team for us, Jonathan Allen was former White House bureau chief for Politico, and by the way, is co-authored of the book Shattered, which was all about the inside of the Hillary Clinton campaign. Jonathan, you're good at talking to people on the ground and getting a feel for a story, but with these few votes separating these two guys, I think we need abacus, computer, and weather vane all together.
Thank goodness we've got Steve Kornacki.
Yeah, there you go.
For a little historical perspective, Brian, 44 years ago in February of 1974, a young Democratic Marine veteran named John Murtha ran for Congress in a Republican district and won by 122 votes. And as you know, went on to serve for about 25 years after that. I'm sorry, about 35 years after that. So, you know, there's some precedent for what we're seeing here.
And Jonathan, are we going to hear from the candidate? We've heard back and forth over the past hour. He's going to come down and do what Saccone did and basically excuse everybody for the night, say it's going to be a long one. Maybe we'll see you tomorrow.
We're expecting to hear from Conor Lamb pretty soon here. Chance of Conor keep going up. A little bit of a tease, turn around, and he's not there. But the expectation is he'll be up within the next few minutes.
I saw something interesting tonight. Every time Rick Santorum came on television, he's an analyst these days for CNN, the crowd would boo. Have they kept that policy up all evening?
They have. Rick Santorum, former Pennsylvania senator from this part of the state, or at least his roots were, his base was out here, and the folks at this Conor Lamb party do not like him at all.
Wow. Two things you can predict about the folks in that room. They love their Steelers. They don't like their Santorum. Jonathan, we'll keep catching up with you and checking in with you. Thank you very much. Phil Elliott also standing by for us, politics correspondent for Time Magazine. Phil, thank you for your patience. I've been wanting to get to you like a dream sequence to ask you, what do you make of what we're seeing unfold in electoral politics tonight?
Well, I'm talking to my sources on Capitol Hill. Republicans are very scared tonight. This should have been a slam dunk. This should not have been a close race. This is an R+11 district. They've been doing the math on the back of their bar tabs in many cases. There are between 110 and 120 districts that are less safe for Republican incumbents than this district in that corner of Pennsylvania. If you're Paul Ryan in an R+4 district, you're freaking out a little bit here that perhaps the resistance is as strong as has been rumored, and perhaps no Republican in this country is safe, even in Trump country.
Hey, Philip, as soon as I brought you out, I have to interrupt you to bring Mr. Lamb up to the microphones, where he will, as expected, give not a victory nor a concession, but a speech that's a nice way of saying thank you, go home and rest, and stand by. Let's listen in.
It took a little longer than we thought, but we did it. You did it. You did it. You did it. I see so many great friends out here. You know, 4 months ago, right after we won the Democratic nomination, before we ever even had a chance to open an office, the grassroots leaders that are in this room tonight came to us and they said, print us something, print anything so we can get out there and start canvassing. They said, get going, they said, or we're going without you. Well, we went together, and I can't thank you enough. We followed what I learned in the Marines. Leave no one behind. We went everywhere. We talked to everyone. We invited everyone in. And we found that there is public support for programs like Social Security and Medicare that's nearly universal, because these programs are universal. They are America's way of saying, we are all in this together.
Brief interruption here. It's Brian Williams back in New York, and forgive me, but he was introduced on stage as the congressman-elect, and he came out and said, "We did it." So we don't blame you if you're confused, but we want to let you know no news organizations have called this race. Wherever they are getting their optimism is where they're getting their optimism. We're crunching it all. If you've watched any of Steve Kornacki this evening, you know that to be true. Our decision desk at this network doing the same thing. Even the Associated Press has said they won't have a call tonight. So it's up to the Lamb campaign to use the words they want. We just want to let you know as you listen.
I've heard, Conor, the job you're running for is the House of Representatives. So if you get down there, do the job. Do the job. Okay, I will. Mission accepted. People are so tired of the shouting on TV and in our politics. It's amazing what happens when you're in a room with real people who have real aspirations and real troubles. There's lots of ideas. There's no angry shouting. Our job in Congress is to attack the problems, not each other. People want to be heard. They want to talk about serious things and honest solutions, not be drowned out by dark money, distorting the truth, and telling lies to our children. I'm proud that you helped me refuse corporate PAC money. You helped us raise millions in small contributions, 86,000 donations. Almost all of them small, every one of them in the open, just like our campaign. We were able to campaign the way American democracy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be for you, not just on TV, but in your town halls, at Legion posts, in small auditoriums, on your street, at your door. And side by side with us, at each step of the way, were the men and women of organized labor. Organized labor built Western Pennsylvania. Let me tell you something. Tonight, they have reasserted their right to have a major part in our future. These unions have fought for decades for wages, benefits, working conditions, basic dignity, and social justice. Thank you. Thank you. You have brought me into your ranks to fight with you. Let me tell you something else. I am proud to be right there with you. Thank you. Let me finish with this. I'm a Pennsylvania Democrat. A proud Western Pennsylvania Democrat. This is the party of my grandfather. He believed in FDR, who taught us all. He taught us all that people have a right to know that their government walks on their side of the street. What that means is I'll work on the problems our people face, secure their jobs and pensions, protect their family, and I will work with anyone to do that. We're practical people. We're serious people. And tonight, we celebrate regaining our voice and our vote in the great business of governing this country we love. Thank you.
Conor Lamb, and again, going by his remarks, his opening comment was, "We did it." By our telling, he was talking about achieving a campaign to the finish line. I think the Lamb campaign is very optimistic about their chances, John Howman.
I think they are, and I think, I think the question that Steve Kornacki has been raising is the question of whether or not there's going to be a recount now, but they, I think, are looking at the numbers, and as campaigns are wont to do, they're making reasonable projections on the basis of the vote that's out, as Steve has been, and saying, I don't really see any way for our opponent to make up this ground tonight or later tonight or early into the morning tomorrow. Again, there's this question, will there be a recount or not? But you have a lot of, in our history, you got a lot of candidates who claim victory when they're within the margin that triggers a recount. If you get it, once all the votes are in, even if you've won by 6 votes, if you've won, you're going to stand up and claim victory at that point. I think they're a little premature, but they're not unreasonably premature given what we know, or at least what our friend Mr. Kornacki has been telling us tonight about where the votes are.
The aforementioned friend, Mr. Kornacki, if you missed the reference at the top of the broadcast, coming out on the winning end of a bicycle versus pavement encounter, playing hurt for us tonight, juggling more than any man should, but he's been following every last vote in this race. The good news for our viewers is, starting at the top of the hour, he's going to anchor live the next hour, but for these waning minutes, give me an update on where we stand, Steve Kornacki.
Yeah, by the way, I wish I had a better story than falling off a bike for this.
But yeah, it's fine. Or you've joined the Professional Bowlers Tour and you got to wear this thing.
Oh, okay. I'll take that, actually.
Okay.
Pete Weber, is that his name? Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All I know about professional bowling right there. Okay, so right now, here's where we stand. 579, that's the margin district-wide. A couple things are left. There's one more wrinkle to add to this, but let me get there first. First of all, as we know, we got Westmoreland in, that's all done. We got Allegheny in, that's all done. We're waiting on the absentees in Washington. Now, based on what we've seen in Westmoreland and what we've seen in Allegheny, I think there's a chance that in these 1,200 or so absentee ballots that are left in Washington, I think there's a chance that Lamb, even though this is a Republican county, Lamb gets more of those than Saccone, maybe even significantly more. So the idea of Saccone eating into that 579 in the biggest chunk of real estate left on the map here, Washington, really don't see it right now based on history, based on what we've seen tonight. And again, there's only 200 absentee ballots down here in Greene. And again, based on what we're seeing, I don't see Saccone getting really anything out of Greene either. So then that takes you to this question of a recount. Oh, excuse me, that takes us to the one more class of ballots that is still out there and has come into the picture. These are people who showed up at the polls today and they had some kind of an issue. They were challenged on their residency. Their status as a voter is yet to be determined. So they cast what's known as a provisional ballot. Now, we don't have a number on this, but we think there are in the low hundreds of provisional ballots, a couple hundred maybe of provisional ballots. The provisional ballots tend to be very Democratic. So that's a class of ballot that's out there, maybe a couple hundred. So again, if you don't see Saccone eating into that 579 here in the absentee, you certainly don't, watch me be proven wrong, but you certainly don't see it happening based on history in the provisionals, and it leaves military ballots, ballots cast by members of the armed services, sort of sent in. There's not going to be many of those. Here's what we know. In the 2016 presidential election, much higher turnout in these counties that include Pittsburgh, the entire county, because a lot of these are not even in the district, they only had 400 military ballots. Special election, much lower turnout, only parts of counties. That 400 may only number in the dozens. So while military ballots tend to favor Republican candidates, there may only be dozens, maybe a couple score of military ballots that are out there. And that takes you to the end. You got absentees, hard to see Saccone making a dent there. You got provisionals, easy to see Lamb climbing in terms of the margin right there. And then you got, whatever you pick up in military ballots. So, we could end up in a recount situation. That number, if Lamb got a big boost out of provisional, he might even be, vying to crack that 0.5 number. But I think that's kind of where we're ending up tonight, Brian.
All right, Steve Kornacki, thanks. And a reminder, Steve's going to be taking the next hour of live coverage here when we continue. So important, all of the points you've heard Steve make all tonight. Military ballots, for example, were much higher when the Pennsylvania elements of the Guard was deployed during the heavy warfighting tempo of our two conflicts, seemingly without end. But that has become a moving target and is a different story now. The story we had when the polls closed this evening, we have not made a call in this race. This news organization, no news organization has made a call in this race. Way too close to call, as you've heard Steve say, way too many elements out there and still floating and unresolved. So we'll bring to a wrap the last 2 hours of live coverage, going to the next hour of live coverage with our national political editor, Steve Kornacki.
All right, good morning, everybody on the East Coast. Still night on the West Coast. I'm Steve Kornacki. We're continuing our live coverage of the special election in Pennsylvania, that race in the soon-to-be defunct 18th District. Democrat Conor Lamb, Republican Rick Saccone. It is still being classified by NBC News as too close to call. Where we stand, 99% of the expected vote now been counted. Each candidate very close to that 50% mark right there. Conor Lamb, the Democrat, he has a lead. It's 579 votes. 227,000 have been cast. 579, that's the margin right now. That number accounts for all of the Election Day vote and much of the absentee vote. NBC News, this is key, has not yet declared a winner in the race. As you just heard, though, the Democrat, Conor Lamb, he took to the stage just minutes ago, and he declared victory.
It took a little longer than we thought, but we did it. You did it. You did it.
Now, the chair of the House Democrats Campaign Committee also declaring victory on Lamb's behalf, saying in a statement tonight, quote, "I want to congratulate Conor Lamb and his team of grassroots supporters on an incredible victory. I'm excited to have Conor as a colleague and look forward to working with him on the critical issues facing our country. These results should terrify Republicans." Now, the Saccone campaign, the Republican campaign, it is not conceding at this hour. An animated Rick Saccone took to the stage tonight after the Election Day votes had been counted. This is what he had to say.
I just came down to, we're still fighting the fight. It's not over yet. We're going to fight all the way. We'll keep it up. We're going to win it. God bless you all.
All right, again, that was Rick Saccone earlier tonight. His campaign is telling NBC News they have been in touch with legal counsel tonight. They are exploring their full range of legal options here. More on that in a minute. Pennsylvania, that law requires a recount for statewide races. Key word there, statewide races, if the candidates are within 1/2 percentage point of each other. The law, it's a little unclear, though, on what happens when we're talking about a congressional district as opposed to statewide. So let's take a look here, first of all, at the board. If you're Rick Saccone and you are not conceding at this hour, well, it's hard to blame you for that because there are still some votes out here. And after all, the margin is only 579. That's what he's got to make up on paper. Hey, maybe that's possible. Let me show you, though, what he is up against at this hour right now. All of the vote, the absentee, the Election Day vote, it's in Allegheny, all the vote in Westmoreland. What we are waiting for, these two counties, Washington and Greene. Between the two of them, just under, the total is actually 1,395. That's the number of absentee ballots that are outstanding here. Now, these things are colored in red on your map, so you're saying, hey, Republican districts, 1,400 votes, maybe he could make up a big chunk of that right there. The problem that Saccone has is that the absentee ballots that have been counted, and this is a historical pattern, this precedes tonight, but the absentee ballots that have been counted, Lamb is overperforming what he did on Election Day. He overperformed in Allegheny County what he did on Election Day when they counted the absentees. He did much better on the absentees than the people who went out and voted today at the polls. Same thing in Westmoreland. It was an 11-point difference there, 11 points better for Lamb. So if that holds, you're in Washington right now. Rick Saccone is winning 53% of the vote in Washington County. If Lamb improves by 11 points there, as he did in Westmoreland, then Lamb is winning the absentee in Washington, maybe even winning it by a substantial margin. An opportunity there, if this pattern holds, for Lamb to build on that 579 in Republican area. We think sometime between, how about this, between 1 and 3 a.m., we're expecting to actually get those absentee ballots from Washington. They are up late, though. They are doing it. They've promised they're going to get us some numbers. So we will know tonight what happens there. Then all that's left is green. They've gone to sleep in green. By far the smallest part of this district, like 2% of the district is down here. There are 200 absentee ballots there. So it is, we'll see, but on paper it is very hard, actually, for Saccone to make up that 579. The only thing left after that, then, to be counted, provisional ballots. Folks who went to the polls today, maybe there was an issue with the address, what was written in the book, something like that. The provisional ballots, going to count those, probably a couple hundred. They tend to favor Democrats, maybe by a big margin. Again, historically, military ballots, maybe we're looking at dozens, maybe 100, maybe, 150, something like that. They tend to favor Republicans, but you're looking at probably those military ballots being canceled out by the provisional. So to get that 579, hard to see where Saccone comes up with it. You could see why he's going to wait and see, and we'll all wait and see. But the only other option after all that, then, maybe he wants a recount. Maybe that law comes into play. We will see if it goes into that kind of overtime. But Lamb is holding on. A lead. If you're a Democrat, you got to be feeling good about having that lead right now. If you're a Republican, you are up against it at this hour. Speaking of the Republicans, let us go now. Actually, I'm sorry, we're going to go to the Democratic headquarters. Jonathan Allen, national political reporter for NBC News Digital. He joins us now from Conor Lamb headquarters. NBC reporter Vaughn Hilliard. He is on the Republican side, Rick Saccone headquarters. Let me start with you, John Allen, because the candidate you're covering did declare victory tonight. You're talking to that campaign. Why are they confident in this call right now?
Well, I think they're looking at the numbers you're looking at, number one, Steve, that this is a big mountain for Saccone to climb. The other thing is, I think Conor Lamb's he's a former Marine, a retired Marine, and he saw an opportunity to, a little bit of chaos going on, to jump in there. We've watched in politics over the years that candidates will try to declare victory even before it's happened, to try to win the public relations war over it, to try to convince the other side to back down.
All right, and over to you, Vaughn Hilliard. On the Republican side, look, I took you through the basic math there, but, I mean, what are they telling you? What are they seeing when they look at that map?
Well, so I just talked, it would have been great to have Bob Branstetter. He's the general consultant for the Rick Saccone campaign. I asked him to come on air with us here so we could engage in that very conversation. He declined the opportunity, but what we did talk through was exactly how long will this process go? Because he laid out exactly as you just laid out there, Steve, those exact three sorts of pots that we're waiting to see. The provisional ballots, the military absentee ballots, and the number three. We're getting late here in the evening. I'm sorry. And so we're waiting, though. And so he said at this point is that it's several days, he said, of these. And this is the military absentee ballots, Steve, are not due to their understanding up until March 20th. So that's a whole week from now. They said, I was asking about the recount. They said it is their understanding that for congressional districts, that they are not legally able to demand a recount. They said at the same time they will be able to request a recount if they so desire and they see it within their realm of possibility. They also, the campaign, intends to review the absentee ballots that came in from these counties to look for discretions over, as you were talking about, these addresses. Because in order for an absentee ballot to qualify, it has to match exactly, somebody filling out the absentee ballot has to fill out the exactly, as you said, address, fill out exactly what is showing up on those voter registration rolls. Yes, this sounds like quite a task at hand, but they said they are not conceding, no matter what Conor Lamb says tonight. They are in this for the long haul. And it made me chuckle when you heard Rick Saccone, when he played back that audio, and he said, we're in it to the end. And and Rick Saccone clearly has every intention of doing so based on my conversation with Branstetter. They said that they're in touch with the legal counsel and they're going to be pushing this through the end. This is, to remind you, a campaign that has gone on for months already. They might as well keep it going. And one other thing, Steve, I know that you'll be interested in this, right? I wanted to confirm with him, March 20th is not only that day in which the military ballots are required, but also petitions to qualify for the November ballot. And he confirmed to me that Rick Saccone plans to run in the 14th district and have his petitions in next Thursday to not even run in this congressional district, but the other congressional district, the new, as part of the maps. So there's that, Steve.
And that is a very interesting detail at the end there. This Saccone campaign will fold one way or the other into a campaign in this sort of newly configured 14th district, which for folks at home who haven't been following the details of this is going to be a very Republican district. So that's where Saccone is. And then the question is, we assume Lamb is going to go north to this district where there's a Republican incumbent. It looks like a 50-50 race. We assume that'll happen. That's some great information there, though, from Republican headquarters there, Vaughn Hilliard and John Allen at Conor Lamb headquarters. Thanks to both of you for joining us. And also joining us now, Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics, Jonathan Alter, Daily Beast columnist and MSNBC contributor. Jonathan, and before I get to you, let me just throw these dates out there. This is what I have written down. This might be relevant as well. What I've been told is the Secretary of the Commonwealth in Pennsylvania will have until March 22nd, that's 8 days from now, to decide if there's going to be a recount. That the campaign could petition. I think the Secretary of Commonwealth makes that call. And these provisional ballots we're talking about, folks at the polls today, maybe there was an ID issue, something like that, 7 days. They're going to be counted within 7 days, so a couple of the deadlines there. It does occur to me, listening to what Vaughn just said from Republican headquarters, the rule is the House is the ultimate judge of its elections. And the Republicans do control the House. And there are moments in congressional history where there have been disputed elections. The bloody 8th in Indiana in 84 and 85, Democrats wouldn't seat the Republican. I mean, are we looking potentially at a situation like that at all?
We could be, but I don't think so. So as close as this is, based on your very shrewd, math, it doesn't feel like there's going to be that much doubt when all the absentee ballots and these other ballots are counted based on your projections. So strangely enough, I think it has to be even closer, or they have to have some evidence of, irregularities or something else for the House to really take this up. I don't think that Paul Ryan and the House majority wants the country's attention focused on this race. It is very bad news for them. Paul Ryan now has to worry about, his reelection. He's in a +4 district. They just almost lost, or have lost, a +20 district. So basically every Republican in the House of Representatives is kind of looking at themselves and saying, we want to get as far away from these Pennsylvania results as possible.
Yeah, and Caitlin, pick it up on that, because we'll see who ends up winning, but this is a 20-point swing from the 2016 result. Trump wins the district by 20. It's 50-50 tonight. And we've seen this. Kansas 4th district last year, Montana, South, these double-digit swings away from where Trump was in 16 in these districts to the special election.
Right.
Add this to the mix now. What's that going to do to Republicans on Capitol Hill?
Right. These swings, certainly, and you've also seen in these races Republicans meeting their targets in a lot of areas, but Democrats vastly overperforming the previous ticket, which is also speaks to Democratic enthusiasm. I think a lot of Republicans were looking at this race even before it started tonight, even before the polls closed tonight, and were trembling a bit. I mean, it would be political malpractice for the party not to prepare for these kinds of headwinds, just given historically what we know. But I think what we saw tonight was a district that Trump won by 20 points. You have over 100 districts that are more competitive than this district. So the ones Democrats are already targeting, I've talked to some Republicans today who say that this race means that the map is officially expanded.
Okay, and the fallout now begins, even as the counting and maybe even the recounting continues out there. Caitlin Huey-Burns and are they sticking around? Let me see if I can get... They are sticking around. I was going to say, why am I thanking them? I think they're sticking around. Okay, I want them to stick around. Excellent. Caitlin Huey-Burns, stick around. Thank you very much. President Trump, meanwhile, said he plans to campaign for Republican candidates. But new reports say some of the most vulnerable Republicans do not want the president's help. That is next. All right, as we try to continue to track down those outstanding votes in PA-18, we are joined now by Melanie Ostrander. She is the Assistant Director of the Washington County, Pennsylvania Board of Elections. Washington County, where at this moment they are counting absentee ballots. Rick Saccone trying to eat into that 579 vote lead district-wide that Conor Lamb has. Melanie, thank you for joining us. I know you're in the middle of a lot there right now. Let me ask you this. Do you have a sense when this count of these absentee ballots will be complete?
We're anticipating 2:30, 3 o'clock.
2:30, 3 o'clock, so an hour and a half or so from now. You have, make sure we're right on this, there are 1,195 absentees?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that was the number of ballots received, not the number of ballots that were sent out. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay,
yes,
great. And do you have any indication right now? Have you been counting them, how they're going at all? Can you tell us anything?
I have not. I'm in a separate room from where they're counting what my process is doing, so I have not been in there to check on the totals yet.
Okay. I'm sorry?
We won't be releasing a preliminary totals. We're just going to release the final total once we've finished everything.
Meaning you'll release the final total of the entire county's vote?
Right, after we've recorded the absentees.
I see. Okay. Well, we'll have to do a little bit of math when you do that. One of the issues we've been hearing about and that the Saccone campaign is now talking about is they say beyond these absentee ballots, we're going to be looking at provisional ballots and military ballots, and we're trying to pin down how many of those are out there. Can I ask you, do you have a sense, A, how many provisional ballots were cast in your county today?
I do not. We did not start on those yet. Our focus was getting these absentees counted. On the military outstanding absentees, there are 14 that are outstanding, and they have until March 20th to be received by our office.
Okay, that's very significant. So in the Washington County portion of this district, there are a total of 14 military ballots that could come back, and you're not sure on the total number. But can I ask you this? And I'm not looking to pin you down on specific numbers here, but generally, do you have a sense how many provisional ballots you end up with in an election?
This election, there seems to be more than a normal election.
Okay.
Not as many as what we had in the 2016 presidential election, though.
And do these, just generally speaking, not specific to tonight, but do these provisionals, do you find, do they tend to break a little bit more Democratic than the Election Day vote?
That I can't say. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't want to answer incorrectly.
Okay. Well, I think I have burdened you enough for this very, very late, or I guess early hour. But Melanie Ostrander, it is I actually think I love elections. I think it's probably a very exciting night for you down there tonight. I hope it is at least. And I thank you for joining us.
I think it is as well. Yes. Thank you. You're welcome.
Okay. Excellent. Good luck down there. Anyway, we will keep you posted as we learn more there from Washington County. Meanwhile, this was President Trump's rallying cry to voters in the Allegheny.
Returns the whole world. Remember that. They're all watching. We want to keep it going. We want to keep the agenda, the Make America Great going. You got to get them in. This is a very important race.
As we were talking about, Donald Trump won the 18th congressional district in Pennsylvania by 20 points in 2016, but the Republican candidate he endorsed trailing tonight. The site Decision Desk HQ reports that Conor Lamb won 172 precincts that were won by Donald Trump in 2016. He flipped them. Rick Saccone, meanwhile, didn't win a single precinct that was won by Hillary Clinton in 2016. And before tonight's results started coming in, Axios reported that only 2 of 23 vulnerable Republican House members want President Trump to campaign for them in their districts. Joining us now, David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, and Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an MSNBC contributor. Thanks to both of you for joining us. David Jolly, let me just ask you, it's sort of a psychology question. You know the psychology of a member of Congress in an election year. Republican who's in a potentially competitive district this year, watching this tonight, what's the reaction that you're going to have?
It's the panic button, Steve. Look, Donald Trump does not help down-ballot Republicans. He only hurts them. Democrats won tonight. Democrats won really big. Republicans underperformed by about 20 points. And so when you're looking at the current House of Representatives, you have about 23 Republicans in the House of Representatives that hold districts that Hillary Clinton won. So if you're looking at PA-18 and saying this should be a 20-point Republican district, what does that mean for those districts, those 23 districts that Hillary won but Republicans hold in Congress? It is setting up a blue wave, and I say that as a Republican, not trying to bring on an ominous tone, but the reality is Democrats won big tonight, and every Republican on Capitol Hill is terrified of the results this evening.
So Maria Teresa Kumar, for Democrats in Washington, maybe Democrats running in districts around the country trying to flip Republican seats, what's the strategic lesson here? I mean, we heard a lot about Conor Lamb being sort of the district, being a cultural fit with the district, a little bit at odds with the national party on a few different things. Do you think at the end of the day those things were important, or was it just, hey, it's the Trump midterm and this is what you're going to get?
No, I think that what he did was basically what we saw in Virginia, what we saw in the Midwest during the Super Tuesday, and then more recently what we saw in Alabama. The Democrats have realized that the way they win is by not leaving any voters behind. He knocked on every single door. He talked about the issues that community particularly cared about. He was basically able to say, look, I actually agree with the president on the tariffs when it comes to steel, but let me meet you halfway. He was able to bring back a lot of the working class voters that people are concerned that you couldn't do it, but it's because he talked to them. But I think the biggest concern right now for the Republicans is the fact that they're going to have to spend a lot more money just to basically safeguard districts like they saw tonight that they thought were safe. There are over there's close to 110 districts, excuse me, Steve, 110 districts where the margin of victory of the Republicans was less than 20 points. They're in trouble.
Yeah, I said, David Jolly, I guess, put your strategist hat on here. What could an endangered Republican do? We've seen tonight's result, not an aberration, however it officially ends up. This swing is consistent with a lot of these special elections. You're an endangered Republican. You're trying to survive. You need that sort of hardcore Republican base to be with you to win. What do you do?
Look, Republicans are in a paradox right now because Donald Trump hurts down-ballot Republicans, but if you criticize Donald Trump, it deflates GOP turnout. And so what we're seeing is this broad paralysis among Republicans. And to the earlier point, listen, Democrats have done something in both Alabama and Pennsylvania that if they stick with it is good for the Democratic Party, it would be good for both parties, which is to embrace candidates that can sell their message to their specific district. You know, there are these litmus tests in both parties, but what we saw in Alabama was a Democrat winning a deep red state. What we're seeing in Pennsylvania 18 is somebody who actually came out and said, I'm not going to support Nancy Pelosi. Now, the family conversation among Democrats is very hard in that conversation, but the reality is to win those districts that Donald Trump took from Democrats is going to take a bigger tent within the Democratic Party. Republicans have failed to realize that. Republicans have shunned moderates, have shunned diversity within their party, and as a result, we have a party defined by Trumpism.
And Maria, I think that's right, and I think go ahead. Well, I think that's absolutely right, and I also think that because this election was basically so close, you're going to see a new wave of Republicans that are basically going to say, "I'm not going to run again for re-election," and that opens up a can of worms because the candidates that step in might be much more volatile than the ones that we have right now.
Okay, Maria Teresa Kumar, David Jolly, thanks to both of you for joining us. And coming up in Pennsylvania 18, well, was it Trump? Was it all about the candidates themselves? We're going to get more into that. That's next.
They say that the other side is energized. Let me tell you, they're energized for hate for our president. I've talked to so many of these on the left, and they have a hatred for our president. I tell you, many of them have a hatred for our country. And I'll tell you some more. My wife and I saw it again today. They have a hatred for God.
That was Republican candidate Rick Saccone. On Monday night, the 60-year-old state representative ran against a Marine veteran turned attorney nearly half his age who tried to position himself not as a national image far-left liberal Democrat. Instead, Conor Lamb personally opposes abortion, although he did say he is pro-choice. He says he would stand up to Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi, and like his Republican opponent, he supports President Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs. As Joe Biden told reporters earlier this week, if Lamb wins, you're going to see probably another half a dozen Republicans say they are not running again. Joining us now, Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor. Jonathan Alter and Caitlin Huey-Burns, as promised, are back with me right now. And Jason, let me start with you and sort of pick it up on that. We talked about some of the ideological flexibility that Democrats were comfortable with in terms of making Lamb their candidate, especially when it came to guns, to Nancy Pelosi, these sorts of things. How much of that is a phenomenon we will only see in a place like PA-18 and maybe a handful of others like it around the country, versus when you think ahead to Democrats choosing a presidential candidate in a couple of years, are we going to see that there too nationally?
You know, honestly, Steve, I think after you keep losing and losing and losing, you start not being as concerned about ideology as you are about who can actually win. You know, Conor Lamb was somebody who could win, and Democrats have recognized that if they're going to have to win in these red states, if they're going to win in these swing districts, they're going to have somebody who can beat a Roy Moore. They're going to have a Doug Jones. They're going to have a Conor Lamb. So I think this ideological flexibility that we're going to see in these House races and some of these gubernatorial races, it's going to trickle up. Whether we get a Kamala Harris, whether we get a Deval Patrick, whether we get a Cory Booker, whether we get a Castro running, they are going to have to realize that the Democratic Party is a lot bigger than supposed liberal elites. It was never entirely that party. And I think we're going to see some flexibility in 2020 candidates. They know that being deft and swift on issues and changing to what matters to people locally and not just large national messages is how you're going to win this election.
The other interesting thing here, Jonathan, to me, it's the generational question. Because when we talk about Pennsylvania, when we talk about this part of Pennsylvania, we typically think of Joe Biden. And Joe Biden was out here campaigning, and we say he's got this bond with these types of voters, and that can help Democrats. Here, though, you got a guy who's, 33 years old, born in 1984, and he carries that district, too.
Well, what was so interesting to me about Conor Lamb's speech tonight is that you've got this really youthful, energetic guy, but he's talking about Franklin Roosevelt. You know, so it's a fusion of the energy of youth and the traditional Democratic Party message, very strong on Social Security and Medicare, strong labor. Over on Fox, they're saying, oh, he ran as a Republican. That's completely untrue. That's their rationalization, you know, for why he's done so well. But he is not running as what used to be called like a San Francisco Democrat, you know, super liberal on cultural issues. That just doesn't play in certain parts of the country like this district in Pennsylvania.
The San Francisco Democrat was the term from the year he was born, 1984. The convention was that year for the Democrats out there. Caitlin, how about from the Republican standpoint? One thing that's interesting about Saccone, though, that I noticed in this district was on sort of tax policy, business. This is not a Republican who's necessarily in line with this district, this more labor background, working class, that sort of thing.
And in fact, Lamb was able to take the president's tariff announcement and run with it, and kind of painting Saccone as someone who was of the more traditional Republican mold as it pertained to trade policy, which was really interesting. So to your point about the way in which he was able to kind of navigate these waters, I mean, I also think we have to consider with Democratic candidates that Conor Lamb was chosen by the party in this as the nominee, and Democrats are facing a good thing for them, which is that they have a surge of candidates running, a surge of interest, but they are also going to have these primaries where they're going to be battling each other out, and ideology plays a big role in that. So that's one thing that they have to look at. Now, Republicans have also been trying to blame this whole race on Rick Saccone, and Rick Saccone ran as an ally of the president. He endeared himself to the president. The president came and campaigned for him twice, essentially. So it wasn't as if he ran away from the president. He really leaned in, and I've been talking to Republicans a little bit about the Trump factor in some of these, whether he does have that kind of transferable quality for some candidates, and it's going to be on a case-by-case basis, really.
Yeah, and Jason, that's an interesting point that Caitlin raises there, looking ahead to some of these other primaries for House races this year. That's one of the things Republicans are hoping for. They're saying, hey, when the party doesn't anoint the candidate at a convention or something and you put it up to primary voters and you got 8 candidates, are Democrats going to be pragmatic in an 8-way primary, or everybody's trying to be the most anti-Trump?
I don't think so, Steve. Look, I think a lot of the sort of Bernie versus Hillary argument has been erased by the fact that Democrats want to win right now. You know, and in politics and in life and in marriage and everything else, you always ask the question, do you want to be right or do you want to win? Democrats realize that now is the time to win. So I don't think we're going to see some of the most abusive, terrible splits that we've seen. But here's the other thing, and I think this is key. Look, I grew up, I worked around this area. I was around Tim Ryan in the Mahoning Valley in Northeast Ohio. I know that part of Pittsburgh. You know, what you're seeing in Conor Lamb is the kind of politician that those areas have had for the last 35 years. It's only been in this recent sort of 3 to 5 years with this sort of rightward shift in response to Barack Obama that somebody like Conor Lamb seems odd. He's more in line with this district than most of what we've seen over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Jonathan, big picture here. I'm curious where you think the Democratic Party sort of is right now. They suffered a traumatic loss to them in the 2016 election, one I think a lot of them are still trying to sort through. We've seen the party in the past when they've gone, I mean, when Mondale lost 49 states to Reagan and Dukakis, they kind of reinvented themselves in the Bill Clinton mold. Where do you see the Democratic Party right now? Are they searching for a new identity? Are they digging into the one that, where do you see it?
Well, you never want to interrupt your opponent when he's in the process of committing suicide, and that's what they think is going on with Trump. So in some ways they want to just back off and let Trump continue to self-destruct and then run a check Trump kind of campaign. But they all know that they need a positive message. The problem is with the economy improving, it's a little hard to have an economic message that cuts through, and they need to still be careful about these disputes. I don't totally agree with Jason that this Hillary-Bernie thing is over. I think it's bubbling beneath the surface. What's going to be very interesting to me going into these primaries is whether the DNC makes every Democratic candidate in these primaries essentially sign a pledge that says they will enthusiastically support the winner of the primary. Because if they have people kind of sitting on their hands and not supporting the person they lost to in the primary, they're not going to be able to retake these districts. They're going to have to be very, very unified in these districts that Trump carried or that have Republican members if they're going to flip the House.
Okay, thanks, everyone. And coming up, the political expert who has projected a win for Conor Lamb tonight. That's next. All right, none of the news networks have made a call in the Pennsylvania special election yet. That includes NBC News. We have not made a declaration in this race, but at 11:15 Eastern time tonight, Dave Wasserman of the Cook Political Report tweeted this projection. Barring a major tabulation error, Conor Lamb has defeated Rick Saccone in PA-18. And Dave Wasserman joins us on the phone right now. Dave, thank you for taking a few minutes. You know these districts, every district in the country, better than anyone else. So look, it's 579 is the margin right now. The Republicans say they're not giving up. Are you still standing by this declaration?
I am. And, you know, Steve, you know every bit as much as I do about the outstanding ballots. But it's extremely rare for a margin this large to be overturned by, you know, a tabulation error or a massive swing in remaining absentee votes the next morning.
Yeah, so, I mean, take it through what we're seeing right now. I think we're going to get word in the next maybe 45 minutes to an hour or so on Washington County. We're going to get their absentee ballots. There's about 1,200 that are there. Again, the margin 579 district-wide right now. What are you expecting when we hear from them?
What we've seen in other places, in other counties, is that Democrats, not only in this election, but in other races, have overperformed in the absentees by about 5 points compared to the Election Day vote. And if that holds, as you've noted in Washington County, then Lamb could conceivably add to his lead by a small amount there. But look, we're not talking about a swing out of Washington County that would alter that 579 margin by much. And the fact of the matter is, it's entirely possible that Rick Saccone will have won the votes cast on Election Day, but it's the absentee ballots from Allegheny and other counties that will have put Conor Lamb ahead.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? We talked earlier, a lot of absentee ballots from Allegheny and Conor Lamb doing so well with them. When you get beyond these absentees, and we should note there is that small Greene County there with about 200 absentee ballots. I guess we're not going to get word tomorrow. The other thing that's left then, provisional ballots. military ballots. We just heard the assistant elections director there in Washington County, that part of the district, saying, hey, right there they got 14 military ballots. We know military ballots, at least the reputation is they're Republican, but when you hear military provisional, where does your mind go on that?
We're talking about an infinitesimal number of ballots relative to the margin. And Pennsylvania is unique in that there are very low numbers of kind of set-aside vote categories. In other special elections we've dealt with last year, you've had a pretty big early vote and quite a different election day vote or provisional vote. We're not likely to see that in Pennsylvania, where these are very, very small categories of votes.
So let me ask you this, a bigger picture question here. What do you suppose the appetite is of Republicans in general, in Pennsylvania nationally, to contest this thing? Because there's the possibility of a recount here. They're talking about, reviewing all their legal options. The reality is this district, no matter what, vanishes at the end of this year. And these two candidates are probably going their separate ways to run different races this year. What do you think the appetite of the Republican Party is if it ends up with Saccone just a little bit short in this thing?
My sense is that Republicans don't want to drag this out for much longer to come. There's also the added time pressure of Pennsylvania's filing deadline for the November election, which comes next week. And these candidates, both Saccone and Lamb, have only a handful of days to turn around and collect the petitions necessary to get on the ballot in November. It's entirely possible that they'll run and become the favorites in two separate districts that are better suited for them than the current one that they've run in, and that they'll be serving together in the House come January of 2019. Now, obviously, we have a long way to go, but that is a plausible scenario.
And just big picture here, taking this special election, comparing it to the others we've had here. Nationally, there's all the talk. Democrats want there to be a wave. Republicans are saying, it won't be that bad. When you put this in there with all the other special elections we've had, all the other indicators out there, what is it adding up to you? Anything?
In the average of the 7 special congressional elections that have been held in the past year, Democrats have overperformed their typical share of the vote in those districts by 9 points. And keep in mind, Democrats would only need to overperform by an average of 4 points to win control of the House. Now, they're not going to have these huge swings in most districts because Republican incumbents are going to be stronger than in these types of scenarios that we've seen in specials. But even half of the swing that we saw here would be enough to flip an awful lot of districts, certainly more than the 24 that Democrats would need to retake control, and I see them as the favorites to do so.
All right, Dave Wasserman with the Cook Political Report. Something tells me you're not going to sleep anytime soon. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for your good work.
All right, David Jolly and Maria Teresa Kumar, meanwhile, are back with us. And Dave, let me just start with you, actually, on that question. Sure. I asked Dave Wasserman as well about the appetite of the Republican Party potentially to contest this thing. He thinks they're not going to have much of one. What do you, if Saccone falls 100 votes short and says, guys, I want to fight this thing out, send me the lawyers, let's go, what do you think Republicans are going to say?
I think the NRCC is going to move on to their next race, and they're looking at November. But here's the takeaway from tonight. We know Democrats won tonight, whether or not they actually hold the seat or not, and it looks like they will. But here's the big issue, and I was a product of a special election where Democrats were wrestling with what is their message when it comes to, at the time, Obamacare. Republicans today don't have a message, and what you're seeing in all of these special elections where they continue to underperform is they're reaching for what their message is. Do they attack Pelosi? Do they embrace Trump? Do they talk about tax cuts? What is it? And the reality is, if you can't win a race that Trump won by 20 points, you're off message. And that is what's happening at 1st and C Southeast tonight. The NRCC is looking at themselves saying, what is our message going in November to protect these seats that perhaps should be 4-point or 6-point or 8-point seats that are now in jeopardy? What we saw tonight, Republicans do not have a message going into November.
And Maria, if Democrats are looking at, and Dave Wasserman just took us through the numbers on this sort of consistent, steady overperformance, I think if you're a Democratic strategist nationally, it's exactly what you want to be seeing. Let me flip the question around. What is the biggest risk for Democrats in the next number of months between now and the election? something they could do, something to avoid, to compromise that sort of advantage?
That they focus only in the Midwest and figuring that the only way that they get back to Congress is focusing on Michigan and Wisconsin, not recognizing that you have a whole electoral map, that you have unregistered, untapped voters. And I'm thinking of Texas, I'm thinking of North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, Colorado, where you have a boom of Latinos that have just not been registered, but that the policies at the local level reflect mini Trumps. And that is becoming much more caustic, and people are paying attention. That would be one. The other thing I would really caution them, though, is not to leave any voters behind. This idea that worked so well in Alabama, worked really well in Virginia as well, is that they contacted every single voter, whether they were frequent or infrequent voters. And that is that person-to-person contact. It's back to basics. I keep saying when they go low, we go local. And that should be the mantra for the Democratic Party.
All right, Maria Teresa Kumar. Excuse me, and David Jolly, thanks to both of you. And coming
Thanks
up...
for your work, Steve. It's been fantastic.
Hey, listen, I live for nights like this. I appreciate
me too.
that. But,
it's been great.
Nothing like election night, but also a close election night. Suspense and, it's a good form of entertainment. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Appreciate that. And coming up, this election day started with the news that Rex Tillerson has been fired as Secretary of State. We're going to talk about that next. Well, today's election day started with the news that President Trump fired his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, in a tweet, replacing him with CIA Director Mike Pompeo. Back with us now, Jason Johnson, Jonathan Alter, Caitlin Huey-Burns. Jonathan, we've said many times with Donald Trump as a candidate, as a president, these are things we've not necessarily seen before. We've seen stormy tenures for Secretary of State. I was thinking back to Al Haig today, but the specific way this went down, it did go down on Twitter, it seemed.
No class, really also gutless. This is a guy who on TV can say you're fired, but he can't say it to his own Secretary of State face to face. That's a guy who doesn't have any courage or integrity. Having said that, Rex Tillerson was one of the worst secretaries of state in modern history. He just destroyed morale in the State Department. He's left huge numbers of posts unfilled, which is terrible for the United States. So I'm not shedding any tears over the fact that he's gone, but it was handled in a typically pathetic Trump fashion.
And that is the other angle of this, I think. One of the other angles, Caitlin, too, is like this is a relationship, a president-secretary of state relationship that it was clearly toxic for a long time. And there'd been signs that, maybe Tillerson's going to be gone long before now, too. So, I mean, there was questions about the immediate timing with comments he made about Russia the other day. On the other hand, this has been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming. There's been reporting for months that Tillerson was on the outs, and Trump admitted as much today that he had been thinking about this for a long time. What's important here, though, is that, unlike other positions, say the Attorney General, where it's important and part of the job to be independent of the president, the Secretary of State role is different. You have to pretty much be on the same page as the president because you're out there selling the president's foreign policy and national security agenda. And so I remember talking to experts during the transition saying that people like Mitt Romney and others who had different worldviews than the president would immediately butt heads with them, and there would be a troubled relationship. We saw that with Tillerson, the way in which he defied the president on the public stage on various things. Charlottesville was a good example, and also on morality, and also on foreign policy issues.
And Jason, the difference then between Tillerson and Pompeo going forward, it looks like, at least for now, a more functional relationship between the president and the man who will be his new Secretary of State. Do you think that has any meaningful implications for policy, for the direction of American foreign policy?
Well, if we get a Secretary of State who at least publicly is going to be closer in line with Trump, in theory, that should help us with our international relations. In theory, we won't have as many other foreign leaders feeling that they hear one thing from Donald Trump and something else from the Secretary of State. So theoretically, that should all work fine. The problem is that we are potentially looking at a meeting with North Korea sometime in a couple of months. This is a very bad transfer. But also this. Look, Mike Pompeo can step up from the CIA and become Secretary Secretary of State, but it doesn't change the fact that we have so many diplomatic positions that haven't been filled. And when you see something like Rex Tillerson getting fired over a tweet, it makes everyone else who's qualified and capable not want to get these jobs. People seem to go in and out of this administration like Star Trek red shirts or drummers on Spinal Tap. I mean, they're just being removed every 6 weeks because of something that the president's angry about, and that's not how you attract the best people.
And Jonathan, of course, in the backdrop for all of this, too, is the question of North Korea, the potential meeting the president might have. And now you've got Pompeo stepping into that.
Yeah, and Pompeo is a hardliner, so I think the more immediate question is he going to blow up the Iran deal, which he's been talking about. He's been very, very critical of that. How does that affect the North Korean deal? Why would the North Koreans sign a deal with Trump in May if he's just blown up the Iran deal? And the North Korean one is much more complicated, and they're much further along in their nuclear program than Iran is. So, you know, Pompeo is also, his anti-Muslim rhetoric has been off the charts over the years. So there are all kinds of problems with the Arab world that I think we're going to start to face now.
And Caitlin, you have 15 seconds.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, Pompeo, he did get confirmed by the Senate, but I am wondering what those votes look like now that he's been a year in office as a member of this administration. He'll have to defend all of what you just described and the president's foreign policy, national security.
Yeah, these confirmation votes, and unlike other presidencies, they've been a lot of interesting and contentious ones. Thanks to Jason Johnson, Jonathan Alter, Caitlin Huey Burns, all of our guests this hour. Thank you for staying with us on this very exciting night. I'm Steve Kornacki, and we got more election coverage. It's still going on. That's right, after this break. All right, I'm Steve Kornacki. We're still going strong here early in the morning on the East Coast. Might still be last night on the West Coast. This is our continuing coverage. How exciting is this? The special election in Pennsylvania, the race between Democrat Conor Lamb and Republican Rick Saccone. The race still too close to call, according to NBC News. No one has called this race. 99%, though, of the expected vote. It is in, it is counted, it's on display for the world to see. Democrat Conor Lamb currently with a lead of 579 votes. That is out of 227,000 cast district-wide. That number accounts for all of the Election Day vote and most of the absentee vote. But why are we with you live at this hour? It's for this reason. We could be, within minutes, receiving a critical number. That would be the absentee vote in Washington County. That could be enough to tell us if Saccone is going to have any mathematical chance to overtake Conor Lamb. Now, earlier tonight, even though all the votes aren't counted yet, Democrat Conor Lamb took to the stage and he said this to his supporters.
It took a little longer than we thought, but we did it. You did it. You did it.
And the chairman of the House Democrats campaign arm also declaring victory for his party, saying in a statement tonight, quote, I want to congratulate Conor Lamb and his team of grassroots supporters on an incredible victory. I'm excited to have Conor as a colleague and look forward to working with him on the critical issues facing our country. These results should terrify Republicans. That's from the Democratic side. As for the Republicans, Rick Saccone, his campaign, they are not conceding anything at this hour. An animated candidate, Rick Saccone, he took the stage tonight after the Election Day votes had been counted. Here's what he had to say.
I just came down to, you know, we're still fighting the fight. It's not over yet. We're going to fight all the way to keep it up. We're going to win it. God bless you all.
Now, the Saccone campaign tells NBC News they have been in touch with legal counsel tonight, that they are exploring their full range of legal options. Pennsylvania's law requires a recount for statewide races if candidates are within a half a percentage point of each other. The law is a little murky, though. It does not specify what happens when you're in a congressional district like this one, not a statewide race, a congressional district. The Saccone campaign says it may not make a final decision about their next move until March 20th. That is also the deadline for both of these candidates to file paperwork to run in November. Remember, this district is actually going away because of redistricting, so they're going to have to decide which new district each one of them to move into if they want to keep running. Again, let me get you up to speed here on exactly what we're looking for, though. 579, that is the margin at this hour, as we said, for Conor Lamb. And what we are waiting for, we talked to somebody in the Board of Elections office a few minutes ago. It's right here. It's Washington County. We got basically 1,200 absentee ballots, of 1,195 of them. They're being counted as we speak. We are going to get the announcement probably this hour of how those votes went. You can see how critical that is. Saccone, he is 579 behind. What can he cut really severely into this lead here? He's certainly hoping so. We got to tell you what he's up against, though. It's two things. First of all, it's this. It's a red county, but tonight, Rick Saccone is not winning it by a huge margin. He's only winning by 7. The other thing is what we've seen in Allegheny and Westmoreland in their absentee votes is the absentee vote there has been more favorable to Lamb than the election day vote. So if that continues, that 53 could come down even further for Saccone. And you're sitting there looking at that bank of 1,200 votes. How many is he actually going to be able to gain? So he would need something. He would need a departure in Washington County from what we saw in Westmoreland and what we saw in Allegheny earlier. He really desperately needs that. Now, can he get it? We're going to find out. But that's certainly the biggest chunk of outstanding votes. Otherwise, you got Green. They're not counting tonight. I think they went to sleep. You got 200 votes there. They're probably going to be counted tomorrow. Again, though, just so for a comparison here, oop, that's the wrong button. How did the race go on election day? It was 58% for Saccone. Here's a very small county, 58% for Saccone. Again, if that trend held, that number might be a little different in the absentee ballots. So absentee, and then beyond that, military and provisional. Military is going to be a very small number. We talked to somebody in Washington County. They said there are 14 military ballots in that entire county. They're going to have a week to get those in and count those, but there's a total of 14 at the most there. You can expect similarly low numbers. I think the rest of the district might be an area where Saccone could cut into the lead, but again, not going to be many ballots there. Provisional, let's see the expectation here. I think especially in Allegheny, the provisional, we're talking only a couple hundred, by the way, low hundreds. That's what we're kind of looking at total. The expectation is maybe in the Allegheny portion, those are a little more favorable to Lamb. You could look at these other areas that are more Republican. Maybe there'd be issues there that would help Saccone. But again, that's it. You're going to have probably scores, dozens or scores of military votes, low hundreds of provisional. So what Saccone needs, and he needs it in this hour, when they release that number from Washington, he needs a big number out of Washington County. I think he's got to do probably better than he did in the election day vote there. He's got to probably improve on that 53%. If you could get a big number, sort of multiply it into that 1,200 of outstanding ballots, maybe he could start to eat into it. The math is stacked against him, but you can certainly understand from his standpoint why he's not given up yet. It's an exciting hour. It's early morning. You're awake with me. How exciting is this? We've got an election coming down to absentees in Washington County, Pennsylvania. We all get to watch it together. If you're up now, do not go to sleep. What would be the point of staying up this late and going to sleep now? I know you're supposed to go to work in the morning. So am I. Who cares? We're going to be talking about this 50 years from now. Anyway, joining us now, Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Jonathan Alter, Daily Beast columnist and MSNBC contributor. And Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor. Jason, let me start with you. Let's go bigger context to start with on this. Whatever happens tonight, we've seen a 20-point swing in this district from the 2016 result. Trump won by 20, and it's not the first district we've seen this in.
Right. This is getting worse and worse for the Democrats, Steve. And look, even as a political scientist, I've always been the contrarian. I've never sort of been in love with the the generic congressional ballot. I think it sort of generalizes too many things. But what we've been seeing is this. These special elections are getting closer and closer, and Democrats have started to break through. They're winning in state Senate races. They're winning in state Houses races. Then they win with Doug Jones. And now they've won with Conor Lamb, or it seems very likely they've won with Conor Lamb. And I think the operative lesson here, and the Republicans have a chance of possibly saving themselves from a blue wave. They have to stop being so lazy with the candidates they're putting up. Conor Lamb was an excellent candidate in any year. Saccone was not a great candidate. And I think if the Republicans are serious about keeping any sort of control of the House and definitely the Senate, they got to make sure that they're putting forth competitive candidates, because if they keep putting out whatever it is they think they can get away with, they're going to get wiped out this fall.
Jonathan, I'm wondering in this next hour, it's a matter of inches here, one way or the other, but psychologically, if the headline ends up being that that Lamb, the Democrat, has won this district versus that Saccone eked it out, by a few dozen votes or whatever, do you think for the average embattled Republican looking ahead to that landscape this fall, do you think there's a psychological difference there between being able to say, hey, at least we still won?
I think so. I mean, I think Joe Biden is right that there will be more retirements among Republicans if Conor Lamb wins this election, even very narrowly. And the more retirements there are, then the more level the playing field is, since incumbents usually have an advantage, and that would help the Democrats get to their magic number of 24 to flip the House. But the other thing that this race is really indicating to me is the Trump factor campaigning locally. This is a guy who goes wherever he wants. You're going to have a lot of Republicans this fall who are going to be running for cover, especially in districts that are much, more closely divided than this one is. They're going to be saying or hoping that the president doesn't come to their district. But Trump being Trump, he's going to go anyway. So you're going to have these very awkward situations where Republican incumbents are going to be campaigning with a president they don't really want to be with.
And Caitlin, that's an interesting issue that this raises. We will see what happens tonight. But if this holds, if Conor Lamb does end up pulling this out, President was just there the other day. How do you think he reacts to this?
Exactly. The president campaigned for Saccone. I mean, a lot of people criticized that rally for being a rally about Trump, but that was also kind of the point. He was trying to transfer his support down the ballot, telling people that a vote for Saccone was a vote for the Trump agenda. And I've been talking to Republicans all day about this, whether that support is in fact transferable. And they're saying, it is going to be district by district. There are going to be districts where the president is going to be welcome. People are going to wrap their arms around him. But other districts like Colorado, for example, the House Republican Democratic map runs through California, New York, New Jersey. Those are going to be very different. So Republicans and the president have to kind of get on the same page and be strategic about the decision, because the outcome of these races, of course, affects all of them.
And Jason, it's interesting, this question of transferability, all these Republicans wondering, hey, Trump has this special bond with the Republican base. Can I tap into that at all? I'm reminded here of the frustration Democrats had in the Obama era. Barack Obama had that bond with the Democratic base 2010, 2014, couldn't seem to transfer it.
No. It's very, very hard to transfer a really magnetic and interesting presidential candidate, whether it's Barack Obama, whether it's Donald Trump, and sort of sprinkle that fairy dust on other candidates. But I think the other thing that's happened is this, Steve. I think Republicans down ballot have realized that, Trumpism it's a nice suit that looks great in the store, but you can't take it home with you. It only fits on one guy. Only Donald Trump can get away with the kind of scandals he's gotten away with and stay popular with his base. Only Donald Trump can make the kind of mistakes he's made as a candidate and then as a president and still stay popular. So a lot of these candidates are realizing, I can't embrace Trumpism the same way because I don't have the same protective field around myself. I think some of them will eventually acquiesce and say, look, I need you to come here and help me raise money. I'm desperate at the end of the game. But I think their behavior is going to moderate because it's not getting them the same results as it gets the guy in the White House.
It's interesting, too, though, Jonathan, that Democrats, Conor Lamb, the campaign he ran, not on all issues, but there are a couple that jump out at me. Trade, particularly guns, the NRA, the question there, everything that's been raised in the last few weeks. This was a message in some ways that was a Trumpist message for a Trumpist district that the Democrats ran on.
Well, on those two issues, but you got to remember, he was very much against the tax cut, and he was very much in favor of Obamacare. So on two big Democratic issues, he took the traditional Democratic line. One area where he took a different path was on Nancy Pelosi, and he said he would vote against her for Speaker. This is going to be a big issue for Democrats and for Nancy Pelosi personally. What is her decision going to be? Republicans spent a huge amount of money in this campaign trying to link Conor Lamb to Pelosi, even though he didn't support her. They're going to do that all over the country. Imagine if Nancy Pelosi says in September or October, after she's raised a ton of money, you know what? I'm not going to be a candidate for Speaker. Then she knocks the struts out.
Do you think that's possible?
It is possible. Not probable, but very possible. And there's been a fair amount of talk about it in her circle.
What do you think of that, Kate?
I mean, she is a huge liability still, and Democrats are saying, well, look, if Conor Lamb wins, that proves that he was able to kind of separate himself from her. But, you know, you talk to Republicans and look at the polling that they're seeing. She is a negative weight on Democrats in other areas where they're not going to have the kind of candidate like Conor Lamb, and where you're not going to have this nationalized attention on one race where you're able to kind of define yourself independent. I mean, Conor Lamb localized this race in an effective way. When you're looking at all these other races going on at the same time, you're not having that kind of attention and the ability to kind of carve out some independence. So that's a problem for Republicans as it pertains to Trump in some cases, but certainly still a problem for Democrats.
And there's a school of thought, Jason, too, that when it comes to midterm elections, the opposition party, whether it's Republicans when Obama was in or Democrats right now, they really don't have to do too much because the nature of these elections is sort of like you want to check on whoever's in the White House. How much of that is carrying everything we're seeing tonight in Kansas last year, Montana, South Carolina, these swings? How much is just sort of the gravity of politics?
Yeah, Steve, I think that's a big part of this. Look, we don't live in a parliamentary system. So if you're unhappy with who's in office, we pretty much only have one other choice. That's why I've always sort of argued that these notions of messages and a lack of message on the part of the Democrats nationally, it's not a big deal during midterms. Does anybody remember the Democratic message in 2006? The only midterm message I can remember is like the contract with America in '94. For the most part, if you are the opposition party, as long as you don't have a big scandal, you're going to end up benefiting. And I also say this, and I think this is important about Nancy Pelosi and her symbolism. If you're the kind of voter who is motivated by animus against Nancy Pelosi, it won't matter if she steps down. It means you're already a hardcore Republican. You're going to vote for the Republican candidate. And even if Nancy Pelosi wasn't there, Donald Trump has made it clear he's got Maxine Waters, he's got Chuck Schumer, he's got plenty of other Democrats he can throw out there as red meat.
And Jonathan, even if it ends up being the case the Democrats don't need to put it together this year in terms of a clear message, everybody being on the same page, they probably do in 2020 if they want to take out Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, I think they do. I think Jason and I disagree a little bit on both of these points. You always need a message in politics. Now, it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all message, but you've got to focus the people on the issues that are of importance to you. And if you just run a kind of a lackadaisical campaign or depending on animus toward Trump, you're going to pick up some seats because of the gravity that you talk about. But to get to 24, 25 more seats than that, you got to have something more going for you. And as far as Pelosi goes, look, I think she was a great speaker in many ways, and she was very much responsible for the Affordable Care Act passing. Had almost as much responsibility for that as the president, Barack Obama. But if you can take a target off your back, why not? If you can get generational change, which millennials and a lot of other voters are ready for, why not? Why keep investing in these old leadership in Congress and also in an older presidential candidate?
That's an interesting question, too. And if Democrats were to go that route, it does raise the question, who next for that? Is Steny Hoyer's the same age? Clyburn's the same,
It won't be.
But one of the things Pelosi's done, I've noticed so well, I think, is insulate herself from an internal challenge. And one of the costs of that ends up being who's next when it's time to go. But maybe we'll have that conversation this year. Maybe we won't. Thanks, everybody. Coming up, how well did Conor Lamb do in Trump country tonight? And, of course, we are continuing to wait. Any minute now, we're getting word from Washington County. It could decide the election, or we could go to overtime. We're going to find out.
Go out on Tuesday and just vote like crazy. You got to get out there. The world is watching. I'm going to be home watching the returns. The whole world, remember that. They're all watching. We want to keep it going. We want to keep the agenda, the Make America Great going. You got to get them in. This is a very important race.
All right, that was President Trump's rallying cry to voters in Allegheny County in the Pennsylvania 18th District. He was there campaigning for Rick Saccone over the weekend. That 18th District special election in Pennsylvania, it comes just 2 years after Donald Trump carried the same district by 20 points. We do not yet know the final outcome tonight. We hope to learn this hour. We are waiting any minute now to get the absentee ballots out of Washington County. I can't wait to tell you. I can't wait to break it all down with you. Before we get to that, while we wait, here's an interesting stat, though. from today's vote, Decision Desk HQ reports Conor Lamb won 172 precincts that were won by Donald Trump in 2016. Meanwhile, Rick Saccone did not win a single precinct won by Hillary Clinton in 2016. That's what happens when you got a 20-point swing there. Joining us now, David Jolly, former Republican congressman from Florida, and Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino, and an MSNBC contributor. David Jolly, I'm curious about this Trump effect in this district, because I could certainly see we saw high turnout, energized turnout against the Republicans in Allegheny County. That's the sort of suburban part of this district. That's where Lamb has done so well tonight. On the other hand, as Dave Wasserman just pointed out, if you look at the votes that were actually cast today, it may end up being the case that Saccone wins the election day vote. Is there a possibility here that while Trump is a drag on Republicans in the suburbs, he came in and ginned up enthusiasm in the rest of the district?
Well, I actually think, and I've been a product of this, I do think the RNC and the NRCC's get out the vote effort all the way through Election Day has outperformed Democrats. And I think that's what we're seeing. More Republicans show up to vote. Even if they disagree with the president, they come home to the Republican Party vote. But, you know, interestingly, with that lead-in clip about Donald Trump, the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue tonight, we saw how Donald Trump reacted in Alabama with Luther Strange and with Roy Moore. What does Donald Trump do tomorrow morning? Does he try to suggest that somehow he made the Republican candidate better in Pennsylvania? Does he suggest that but for him it would have been worse? But the other end of Pennsylvania is also important because, Steve, I don't see a pathway tonight for how Republicans keep the House in November. It is hard to see a pathway for Republicans holding a majority in November, given the fact that this was a 20-point seat that they nearly lost or perhaps lost tonight.
And Maria, I'm not trying to be a shameless promoter counting down to this result here, but it does occur to me, talking about the enthusiasm and the organization on each side. David mentions the Republican effort sort of coming out of the RNC there. On the Democratic side, though, I think we might be getting a test here in the next few minutes in Washington County. Absentee ballots, did they organize? Did they get folks to vote ahead of time in this thing?
Well, this is what's interesting about it, is that the Republicans are acting like Democrats, waiting until the last minute to vote, and the Democrats looks like they're actually doing it ahead of time with absentee. That's usually the flip. But what's really interesting is to see where we are with the provisional ballots. Let's not forget, Al Franken won his senatorial seat because of provisional ballots. He won by 1,000, and it was because these are disproportionately areas where the voting booths go missing. A lot of folks are working families, a lot of folks that don't get the straight information. So I would watch the provisional ballots much more closely than the other two, because oftentimes these are individuals that are infrequent voters. They oftentimes don't know where to vote, and they just show up.
All right, Maria Teresa Kumar and David Jolly, thanks to you, both of you, and we are waiting. As we have been saying, I am dying with anticipation here. Any minute now, the absentee ballots from Washington County, we're going to find out how they voted there. We are still waiting. As soon as we get them, we'll tell you. Up next, though, as that countdown continues, there was no concession speech tonight, but was there a victory speech? We're going to let you be the judge.
Allergies can stand in the way of enjoying the moment. Break through with Allegra, the fastest non-drowsy allergy relief. In just 1 hour, it starts tackling tough allergy symptoms for 24 hours of relief. Get back to the moment with Allegra.
Do you ever have too much stuff to carry and no easy way to do it? With ScottyVest, those days are over. At ScottyVest, we make great-looking clothing with tons of hidden pockets and unique features. Like Clear Touch pockets, RFID blocking, the patented personal area network, and so much more. Now, you can carry all your stuff, hands-free while looking great. Gadget lovers, use our pockets for your cell phone, charging cables, and even a full-size tablet or laptop.
With all the hidden pockets, I no longer have to worry about pickpockets on the subway. And I can wire my headphones right to the collar. I don't have to worry about the wires getting caught in the turnstile.
Travelers, breeze through airport security, leave that extra bag at home, and know your wallet and passport are safe.
I just take it off and send it through the X-ray. Plus, I save on baggage fees.
Love the outdoors? Have immediate access to your headphones, sunglasses, even a drink on the go.
I love my ScottyVest when I hit the trails. I know my water, map, compass, bug spray, sunscreen, and GPS are all at my fingertips. After the first outing, I retired my backpack forever.
Busy parents, use our pockets instead of your purse. Have access to everything you need while keeping both hands free.
I don't have to rummage through a bag
leaving my hands and mind free to focus on my kids.
Golfers, use our pockets for your scorecards, tees, and extra balls.
I Scotty Vest just about every day, whether it's business or pleasure.
The uses are endless. Scotty Vest will change the way you think about clothing and the way you live your life. Never worry about misplacing anything ever again. Try it out. Visit ScottyVest.com and browse dozens of styles for both men and women. There are jackets, pants, hoodies, and more. For a limited time, use promo code TV20 for 20% off your first order.
I'm leaving the track behind, but I'm not standing still.
And with GoDaddy,
I've made my ideas real. I made my own way. Now it's time to make yours.
Everything is working just like it should.
Renew your sense of wonder in the Caribbean. For a limited time, enjoy 2 free perks like complimentary Wi-Fi and drinks, plus savings up to $300 when you book now during the Celebrity Cruises Sail Beyond event.
Spring is coming. Be ready for the new season with incredible offers on a reliable Toyota. Choose from our most popular models like the adventurous RAV4, well-equipped Corolla, sporty 2018 Camry, and more. Right now, get up to $2,000 down payment match on Corolla and CHR. Buy today, and Toyota will match your down payment dollar for dollar for huge savings. Ready, set, go get your Toyota today. Toyota, let's go places.
Renew your sense of wonder in the Caribbean. For a limited time, enjoy 2 free perks like complimentary Wi-Fi and drinks, plus savings up to $300 when you book now during the Celebrity Cruises Sail Beyond event.
All right, we continue to wait for a call in the special election in Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district. Waiting on those absentee ballots in Washington County. As soon as they come in, we will be all over it. Stay up with us, please. Meanwhile, as we continue to wait, we did hear from both candidates tonight. No concession speech was delivered. There might have been a victory speech, or an attempt at a victory speech at least. Republican Rick Saccone took the stage first. Here's what he had to say.
Wow. I'm applauding you. That's why I came out applauding. I'm applauding you all. I just came down to, we're still fighting the fight. It's not over yet. We're going to fight all.
That was Rick Saccone. He came out, talked to his supporters first. After that, Democrat Conor Lamb. Here's what he said.
Well, it took a little longer than we thought, but we did it. You did it. You did it. You did it. I see so many great friends out here. 4 months ago, right after we won the Democratic nomination, before we ever even had a chance to open an office, the grassroots leaders that are in this room tonight came to us and they said, print us something, print anything so we can get out there and start canvassing. They said, get going, they said, or we're going without you. Well, we went together, and I can't thank you enough. We followed what I learned in the Marines. Leave no one behind. We went everywhere. We talked to everyone. We invited everyone in. And we found that there is public support for programs like Social Security and Medicare that's nearly universal, because these programs are universal. They are America's way of saying, we are all in this together. Our issue in this campaign is common ground. We fought to find common ground, and we found it, almost everywhere. Democrats, Republicans, independents, each of us Americans. I've heard it over and over. I've heard over and over, Conor, the job. I've heard, Conor, the job you're running for is the House of Representatives. So if you get down there, do the job. Do the job. Okay, I will. Mission accepted. People are so tired of the shouting on TV and in our politics. It's amazing what happens when you're in a room with real people who have real aspirations and real troubles. There's lots of ideas. There's no angry shouting. Our job in Congress is to attack the problems, not each other. People want to be heard. They want to talk about serious things and honest solutions, not be drowned out by dark money, distorting the truth, and telling lies to our children. I'm proud that you helped me refuse corporate PAC money. You helped us raise millions in small contributions, 86,000 donations. Almost all of them small, every one of them in the open, just like our campaign. We were able to campaign the way American democracy is supposed to be. It's supposed to be for you, not just on TV, but in your town halls, at Legion posts, in small auditoriums, on your street, at your door. And side by side with us, at each step of the way, were the men and women of organized labor. Organized labor built Western Pennsylvania. Let me tell you something. Tonight, they have reasserted their right to have a major part in our future. These unions have fought for decades for wages, benefits, working conditions, basic dignity, and social justice. Thank you. Thank you. You have brought me into your ranks to fight with you. Let me tell you something else. I am proud to be right there with you. Thank you. Let me finish with this. I'm a Pennsylvania Democrat. A proud Western Pennsylvania Democrat. This is the party of my grandfather. He believed in FDR, who taught us all. He taught us all that people have a right to know that their government walks on their side of the street. What that means is I'll work on the problems our people face, secure their jobs and pensions, protect their family, and I will work with anyone to do that. We're practical people. We're serious people. And tonight, we celebrate regaining our voice and our vote in the great business of governing this country we love. Thank you.
All right, the waiting continues. I have an update for you, though. We are waiting for those ballots, those absentee ballots, to be counted in Washington County. Remember, 579 votes. That's the lead for the Democrat, Conor Lamb, right now. There are basically 1,200 absentee ballots in Washington County. Now, they're doing two things out there. One of them takes a while. One of them is pretty quick. One is a hand count of all of the ballots. The other one is they're going to do a scan. It's a very close race. They want to be very thorough. What we're being told is that there are 40 precincts that are left in Washington County for them to do the scan, that the hand counts are completed, that they're now doing the scan, the ballot scan in those 40 remaining precincts. When that is done, if this holds, we will then know who won those 1,200 votes, 1,195 to be exact, in Washington County, those absentee votes. And remember, it needs to be, Saccone needs a big number here. He's trying to cut into a 579 vote lead for Conor Lamb. So that's where they stood. We got that update within the last 2 minutes. Any new update I get, I am going to share with you. I promise you, whatever happens with our programming here tonight, I am staying up, and I want you staying up with me because I want us to all find out together what happens in this county. We cannot invest this much time, this much energy, and be killing ourselves with a lack of sleep for tomorrow and not at least find out how the county voted. So please stay up with me, and I promise I will stay up with you. And in the meantime, we're going to bring in some folks to talk about everything that's going on tonight. Jason Johnson, he's the politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC contributor. Jonathan Alter, Caitlin Huey-Burns, they are back with us. Caitlin and Jonathan, I was saying in the break, I'm almost running out of questions, but maybe I just take a minute here to appreciate the, if you're anybody watching at this hour is either an election junkie or an insomniac. Let's talk to the election junkies among us because you don't get nights like this. Whatever side you're on, this is just exciting.
This is cool, right? I mean, this is the exact, this is an exhibition of every vote counts in this case. I think, we're talking about the actual results, what there will be. I think the fact that we are at this point where it is so close in a district, again, we've been talking about this all night, that Trump won by 20 points. The fact that it is 50-50 with the possibility, to your math, of Lamb pulling this out, I think you have a lot of Republicans across the country really worried, no matter what the results are tonight.
Jonathan, what's going through your mind waiting for these final votes to come in?
Well, since it's 3 o'clock in the morning, one of the things that's going through my mind is I was in a studio on this floor in 2000 on election night at 3 o'clock in the morning, on the air with Tom Brokaw and Tim Russert, and Doris Kearns Goodwin was on at that point. And we were talking about how, that election, the stakes were higher. It was a presidential election, but that it could all be going to court. And indeed it did in Florida. I don't think this one is going to go to court. I don't think the Republican Party nationally really wants to pursue this that much. I mean, these guys are going to run again, in November.
Right.
And they're in different districts. But it is fun for anybody who loves politics, and it's why politics is sometimes compared to sports, because there's just a rush you get from the fun of the chase. But I'm also struck by something that Rick Saccone said earlier in the campaign. He insulted Conor Lamb a lot. He said that his supporters hated God and hated this country. But at one point, he said of his opponent, Conor Lamb, he's still young and idealistic and thinks he can change the world, as if that was an insult, as if that was like a great attack line. And to me, it sort of summarized what's going on now, which is a backlash against that kind of cynicism, that idea that, you know, young people shouldn't be trying to make change, and I think it's why it looks like he's going to lose tonight.
Jason, help us. This is broadcasting. We're supposed to be exciting. Help us pass the time till we get these results. What are you thinking right now? Where's your mind?
Well, you know, first off, I'm thinking, you know, as you were talking before, we've waited this long. It's sort of like you've been binge watching a certain show, and you're like, I'm at the last episode. I need to finish Dexter, right? I have to see how this ends. Yes. So we're staying up to see it. But what's getting me here, and this is very sort of idiosyncratic to Pennsylvania, you know, all Trump kept saying, and he's been saying all along, you're going to get so, you know, we're going to win so much, you're going to be tired of winning. All that winning also makes candidates and it makes parties lazy. Pennsylvania does not have early voting. That means the key to victory is enthusiasm and a ground game. And that's the kind of thing that Conor Lamb had. He had people on the ground. He had people getting these absentee ballots in. He knew that he couldn't rely on early voting one way or another. And I think this race, just like with Roy Moore in Alabama, Republicans will have to look at themselves and say, are we getting complacent here? Are we getting lazy? Are we not doing the things that we used to do when we were really competitive, when we were going against President Obama? Because we shouldn't be in this situation. Republicans should have won this by 2 or 3%, possibly as much as Karen Handel bit Ossoff, and they're not going to win, or looks like they probably won't win, because they weren't willing to put in the work.
One of the characteristics of this district, Caitlin, that's I think a little unique from some of the other ones that we've looked at in these special elections, we have a storyline we're familiar with where there was sort of a Trump surge in a district in 2016, or where there was a Trump backlash in Georgia 6 that Jason just mentioned, where it went from like Romney 23 to Trump 1. So you've got these two. Does the backlash hold? Does the surge hold? We've been following those storylines. Here's a district that Trump won by 20, but Romney also won this by 20. And this has really been, in this century, since the 2000 basically, this has been that kind of double-digit Republican district. Now, in this special election 2018, whatever happens with these absentees, it's a 20-point swing.
It is. And we also talk about this district in terms of Western Pennsylvania and the working class voter. And you also have to consider that it includes suburbs of Pittsburgh, some of which have some very highly educated, higher earners that were not part of that Trump coalition necessarily that we talk about over and over again. So it is really a combination of the two. And when you look where Democrats are targeting, they're mainly targeting those suburban area districts that are, they hope, are disenchanted by the president and the party at large, while also trying to get those voters. I mean, you mentioned this district, but it does have some history of this kind of Democrat, right? Of this kind of brand of Democrat, which I also think is important to consider when you're looking at. You know,
this is the first election since the tax cut. The first big election since the tax cut, and
which Lamb ran against.
And Lamb ran against it.
And the Republicans stopped making that their message at the end, right?
That was, I think, very consequential, because there's been this assumption that Republicans are going to run this fall on the tax cut. Hey, you got more money in your pocket. You didn't see those Pittsburgh suburban men and women going, thank you, President Trump. Thank you, Rick Saccone, who loves President Trump, for my tax cut. There wasn't any gratitude that you saw. A lot of them voted Republican because they're Republicans, but that issue was not driving.
Well, and that raises the question too, right? The Republicans tried, right? And they must have been seeing something about the effect it was or wasn't having.
And you saw over the weekend, the president talked about the economy a little bit, talked about the tax cut a little bit, but really leaned into some of the more cultural issues and pushed the tariffs pretty hard, right? Which Lamb was able to kind of take over for himself. I'm also wondering, though, the result of this, whether we might see Republicans in Congress push some items of legislation geared at ginning up their base of support, kind of showing something for their majority in Congress, whether or not it has any chance of passing. But you see in election years that parties try to do that.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Jonathan Alter, Jason Johnson, I cannot thank you enough for staying up with me later and later and later into the night as we keep waiting for this. And it's still not over. We are waiting. I am a broken record at this point, but Washington County, they are scanning. They are counting. Those ballots are flying through the machines. I hope they're flying through the machines. And any minute now, we are going to find out those 1,195 absentee ballots. How did they go? Does Saccone still have a chance? or is it over? Stay with us. You've made it this far. We'll be right back. All right, folks, here is the deal. We are coming up against the top of the hour. We are running out of people here who can even put TV on the air. A couple things I want to say right now. Number one, I am not going anywhere. If you have made it this far to try to find out where these absentee ballots land in Washington, you can stay up, and I promise you, I will stay up. And the second we find out, I will come on and I will tell you. What's going to happen here in a couple minutes is I think they're going to go to some taped programming, some stuff that ran earlier in the evening. Relive the great moments of the evening if you'd like. Feel free to do that. Please, though, stay tuned if you're interested in getting these numbers, because we will break in as soon as we get them. I will do it. I can't leave here until I get to these numbers, so please stay up with me. Let me just tell you and reset for everyone what exactly it is we're looking for, what the stakes are for the next few minutes, however long it takes. The margin is 579 votes. That is what Conor Lamb leads by. He declared victory tonight. His opponent is conceding nothing. What this is coming down to is this county, Washington County, where they are counting, and I think by machine right now, scanning these absentee ballots. The number is 1195. That's how many they are running through the machines right now. So it's a Republican district, and Saccone, to have a chance to still win this election, he's got to cut severely into that 579. What he is up against is this. He did well, he won it, but by Republican standards, you're supposed to do better in Washington County. He got 53%. You want to be eating into that margin that Conor Lamb has in the district, you're going to need more than 53% of these absentee ballots. And the problem he has is what we've seen in Allegheny, what we saw in Westmoreland earlier, is that Lamb's doing better on the absentees than he did Election Day. That little pattern would have to break here in Washington County, but if it does, then Saccone could get a bump out of here. If it doesn't, though, he very quickly runs out of votes, because all that's left then, Greene County down here, there's only 200 absentee ballots. They're going to count those tomorrow, but there's only 200. Then you're going to have military votes. Those are probably going to break more Republican. There may be like dozens of those, a couple score of those. So not a lot there. And then there's provisionals, and I think especially when we're talking in Allegheny County, we're only talking again about a couple hundred, the low hundreds here of provisionals, especially in Allegheny. I think an expectation there they're going to favor the Democrats a little bit more. We'd see in the rest of the district, but you can see not many votes. And if you're Saccone and you got to cut into that number, your last big place on the map is Washington County. And in Washington County, we have been calling them. We're talking to their election folks there. They're in that room. They're scanning them. Can Saccone make a big cut there, or does it end? When we find out, we will come right on the air. We'll be back at the board. We'll take you through everything. We are going to tape, but if you want to know, stay tuned. Watch along with me, and I'll see you any minute now, I hope.